I died in France, a graduate engineer who fell from a wind turbine tower. Then I woke as Louis Joseph, Crown Prince of France, in 1787, 1 year before the revolution guillotined my whole new family. But I carried 3 centuries of knowledge, and that was my cheat. Mathematics that stunned the famous Professor Lagrange, a plan to fix France's ruinous debt, a modern police force, and the Paris Angels Empire. History had already written my execution. I meant to rewrite it and keep my head. Real quick, like the video and subscribe. It costs nothing and the algorithm thanks you. Behind every line you just heard is a moment that broke first. Let me show you that one. Early winter, 1787. I am sitting in the east wing of Versailles, staring at an exam paper under a crystal chandelier, 2 meters across. Gold scrollwork crawls up every wall, and oil paintings loom in heavy frames. Beside me, an old man in a white curled wig and lace cravat sighs, disappointment flickering in his brown eyes. His name is Lagrange. He bows a little and suggests gently that if I find the material hard, I might start with the basic courses. I have to bite back a laugh, because he has it exactly backward. I tell Monsieur Lagrange he has misunderstood me. I did not come for the entrance exam. I came to sit the graduation assessment for his course. And I mean every word. This unassuming little old man is the founder of analytical mechanics and a pioneer of group theory. The whole age calls him the Prince of Mathematics. He frowns down at the 13-year-old in front of him and says he teaches university courses, that he's afraid I am not ready. A dozen richly dressed noble youths stop scratching at their papers and turn to stare, curiosity all over their faces. One of them is a boy of about 16 in a silk coat with a ruffled collar and slightly upturned eyes. He looks up with open disdain and announces loudly that I still have 2 years of basic courses left. He adds that Monsieur Lagrange himself always says the ladder of mathematics must be climbed, 1 rung at a time, and that the overreaching are sure to take a bloody fall. I let it slide past me. I tell Lagrange plainly that I have self-taught the university curriculum and truly need the graduation assessment. The old mathematician sighs and turns to his assistant, asking Andre to fetch the papers from the bottom of his portfolio. A moment later, several sheets land in front of me. I skim them and find the difficulty has climbed several times over the last set. Still, most of it is what a later century would call high school, with a little calculus salted in. For me, it isn't hard at all, because half a month ago I was a second-year graduate engineering student in the 21st century. I went to France with my supervisor on a wind turbine project, fell from the top of a tower, and woke up as Louis Joseph, eldest son of King Louis XVI. Some quirk of the crossing dropped me into the world a few years early, so the body I wear is only 13. Under Lagrange's scrutinizing eye, I write the answer to the first question. My mind runs down the trajectory of French history I already know by heart. The Great Revolution breaks out next year, and the whole royal family goes to the scaffold. The king knows nothing in this world but how to fix locks. France owes over $2 billion in foreign debt, and its yearly income is only $500 million. The finances have collapsed, so civil servants go unpaid, and the government limps along. Foreign trade is stalled, and the colonies rot a little more each day. To fill the treasury, the cabinet keeps raising taxes. The commoners at the bottom are squeezed dry while the tax-exempt nobility spend like water. Worse, next summer France will be hammered by hailstorms. On top of the last year's droughts, they tip the whole country into famine. After the famine come the bread riots, the storming of the Bastille, the revolution, and hundreds of thousands of heads under the blade. So I count on my fingers the things I must do to keep my own. Fix the fiscal deficit first, then secure enough food, then deal with the ill-intentioned nobles, and finally handle the predatory British and Prussians. And the famine starts in July, which leaves me a little over half a year. I rub my forehead, sour about it. At my age, I can't touch national affairs yet, and I have nowhere to put my strength. A hell mode start, and the save file is already deleted. Not far off, the boy with the upturned eyes watches my hand move and decides I'm floundering. He snorts to himself that this fool actually came claiming he knows university courses, that it's embarrassing. He even wonders why a straw man like me is the crown prince and not him. I ignore all of it and finish the first page. I turn to the next one, impatient, because once I clear Lagrange's subject, I finished the whole curriculum at Paris University. Half a month ago, I told Queen Marie, my borrowed mother, that I wanted to enter politics and pull my family off the death road. She flatly refused and told me to finish my studies first, so I struck a bargain with her. The moment I completed the Paris University courses, I would officially enter public life. With my level, I'm a jet fighter among this era's top students. In 2 weeks, I've cleared nearly every subject, slowed only by the need to memorize the age's wrong answers as though they were true. Lagrange watches my pen fly and stops paying his other students any mind, his eyes going wider by the second. These are problems that take 5 years of university study to solve. I answer them without effort. Clean logic, not one mistake. At 13, and self-taught, he wonders, shaken, whether another Leibniz is being born. Then he narrows his eyes at Andre with a sudden suspicion that the assistant leaked the questions. After all, even a prodigy like Leibniz only started university at 14. He grabs pen and paper, scribbles a few fresh problems and hands them over. He says I needn't finish the rest, and that if I complete just these, he'll consider me passed. The upturned eyes boy sneers inside that Lagrange is going soft on a royal he can see is stumped. He plots to show everyone my paper later and make a fool of me. There are only 5 questions, the same difficulty but less volume, which is good news. I knock out the first 2, then reach the third, which asks me to prove Rolle's theorem. It is familiar ground I could walk in my sleep. I write it out in a few strokes. A smooth curve running between 2 points that sit at the same height must, somewhere in between, level off to a flat spot. There its rate of change falls all the way to nothing. And without thinking I prove it not just for the polynomials Rolle himself had in mind, but for any differentiable function at all. Then I notice Lagrange's breathing has gone rapid at my shoulder. I look up and find the old mathematician staring at the paper the way a man stares at his first love. I glance down and ask, carefully, whether I've written something wrong. He snatches the sheet and reads the proof 3 times over. He murmurs that it holds for differentiable functions too, and wonders aloud why he never thought of it. Then he looks at me with a gaze burning like fire and asks how I came up with it. It lands on me all at once. Rolle only ever showed that between 2 neighboring roots of a polynomial, there sits at least 1 root of its slope. Nobody carried the idea to differentiable functions until the 19th century. Careless. I forgot to dodge. I clear my throat, take the paper back, and tell him I'll just go to the last 2 questions. Lagrange grabs both my shoulders, too excited to hold still. He says this brand new derivation alone proves my ability, and that he'll ride to the university today to file for my degree. I thank him warmly, break free of his hands, give him a quick bow, and bolt for the door before he can launch into a speech. He freezes there a moment, then hurries after me down the corridor. He calls anxiously that I must tell him how I thought of differentiable functions. Behind us, the classroom is baffled. Someone asks, hesitant, whether the Crown Prince has actually graduated. Another points out that I only arrived today, and the upturned eyes boy insists to anyone listening that I must have cheated. Andre sets Lagrange's own on-the-spot problem in front of him and speaks dry as bone. He says the professor said it just now, and that my proof is a genuine new discovery in mathematics. If the Duke of Chartres thinks cheating produced it, he's welcome to try the thing himself. So the boy is the Duke of Chartres. He stares at symbols he can't read, and feels as if he's been struck by lightning. He has always fancied himself the finest of the royal family's young generation, and now he can't even follow a proof already written out in front of him. He clenches his fists and swears that Joseph will crawl at his feet before long. I can't hear a word of it, and I wouldn't care if I could. Children bickering, while I have a country to reorganize before it decides to shorten me by a head. Lagrange catches up wheezing and pesters me a good while. Then he goes quiet, and I watch something click behind his eyes. He mutters it, what if the 2 ends aren't level? He says it a few times, his face turning grave, then hurriedly excuses himself and rushes back to his office. I watch him go and answer under my breath, if the 2 ends sit at different heights, old man, that becomes the mean value theorem which will one day carry your name. Prove it a few years early. Good luck to you. Once his figure disappears, I wave over the attendant trailing me and ask Emin where the queen is. The tall blonde young man bows and tells me Her Majesty is in her tea room. I nod and take off down the wide corridor, and the sprint sets me coughing. It is a reminder that the pneumonia hasn't cleared. This borrowed body is frail, and the illness has dragged on more than a month without a sign of turning. I wave Emin off to show I'm fine, take a few more turns over another 100 meters, and finally reach the doors of the tea room. From today I can finally show what I can do and start saving my own neck. I pull in a breath and stride past the guards on both sides. Inside the warm, elegant room, Queen Marie leans back in an Oriental-style armchair. Her hair is piled 2 feet high, her skin fair, her eyes a lovely pale blue. She holds documents in one hand and black tea in the other while a minister speaks at her side. She's handling government business, because Louis XVI spends all day in his lock workshop. The Queen runs the administration most of the time. I sigh inwardly. Louis XVI is, by the standard of French kings, a genuinely kind and rare man. But he inherited a France full of holes, and between his lack of skill and his obsession with locks, he steers the whole thing into misery and revolution. In a peaceful age, he'd have been a beloved king. I actually have a decent impression of him, and if I can manage it, I truly want to keep him off the blade. The master of ceremonies calls out that the crown prince has arrived. Following court etiquette, I draw my right foot half a step back, bow with my hand over my chest, and return greetings to each minister in turn. Only then do I step forward, excited, and tell my mother I've passed the graduation exam for university mathematics. A brilliant light flashes in her eyes. She sets down her documents, takes my hand with joy, and tells me I'm the pride of my father and her. She's already had my schoolwork verified and knows that, but for mathematics, I passed every subject with excellent marks. In other words, I've now finished the entire Paris University curriculum. She looks at me with a complicated expression and asks why I hid the self-study from them, and adds that I could have learned under famous masters. To explain how a mediocre boy became a prodigy overnight, I fall back on the only story I have. I tell her I've been studying privately for many years, and I say through my teeth that I wanted to give her a surprise. She calls it a truly wonderful surprise. She picks up a strawberry pudding and pops it into my mouth, then strokes my slightly curly hair and marvels at how so much knowledge fits in such a little head. Nearby, a tall, thin man in a dark blue doublet with sapphires at the collar frowns and murmurs to the minister beside him. He asks whether the crown prince just said he'd finished university mathematics. Archbishop Brienne answers that it seems so. The man says it's impossible, and the archbishop admits he's shocked too. From behind them, the Queen's secretary adds, "Lo, that it isn't only mathematics. His Highness has completed more than 10 courses at Paris University, physics and chemistry and geometry and English among them." The minister's eyes go wide, and the room fills with the same stunned murmur. They say a 13-year-old could not possibly manage it, that it is simply unbelievable, and that the old tutors already call him a child of divine favor. With a genius heir like this, France is surely blessed by God. I let the flattery wash straight past me and pull free of the Queen's hands. Then I ask her, a little too urgently, whether our agreement holds and I can enter politics now. She nods fondly and suggests I go to Paris City Hall first, to gather some experience. I frown on the inside. I want to reorganize France and stop the mob from butchering my whole family, and she's offering me municipal traffic and sewage. Every documentary I ever watched about the revolution said the same thing. France's core sickness right now is finance, and the broken officialdom and the failed disaster relief were all triggered by the collapse of the money. Fix France, and you fix the finances first. So I tell her, testing the water, that perhaps Minister of Finance would suit me better. She smiles the kind, gentle smile of a woman who does not believe a word of it. France's finances are a chronic illness. Since Louis XVI took the throne, the whole court has thrown itself at the crisis and stayed helpless. How could a 13-year-old, divine favor or not, ever shoulder that weight? She stops smiling, thinks a moment, and offers the Paris Tax Bureau instead. I know she doubts my ability, and at 13, that's only normal. So I settle for the next best rung and ask to be made Assistant Minister of Finance, in this era that is the Deputy Minister, second in command over the nation's money. Before the Queen can answer this time, the tall, thin man with the cold gaze coughs dryly and steps half a pace forward. He asks whether Her Majesty truly means to let the Crown Prince take part in politics. The Queen turns her head and answers evenly that she did make an agreement with the Crown Prince, that if he completed his university curriculum, he could take part in national affairs. And she names him the Duke of Orleans. I know this man's whole game, because I read the history. He is Louis Philippe, cousin to Louis XVI, worshipped at court as loyal and patriotic. In truth, he has spent his life, as his father did before him, working to pull down the king's line so he can climb onto the throne himself. When the revolution comes and the Girondins vote on whether to kill the king, this man will vote in favor without a flicker. In the end, Louis XVI will be condemned by a vote of 301 to 300. One vote. That is all it takes to send a king to the blade, and I am looking straight at the man who casts it. Orleans' eyes narrow, and I can watch him doing the arithmetic. The Crown Prince has always been mediocre, so why the sudden brilliance? And what is the boy plotting? Whatever the answer, a genius heir would only steady the court's faith in the crown. After decades of his quiet work eroding the royal family, that is the last thing he wants. So he decides he has to smother me before my name can rise. Aloud in a reasonable tone, he says the crown prince is still young and short on political experience. He says it would be more fitting to pick a senior minister to teach me administration for a few years before I touch real affairs. The queen frowns slightly, half convinced. She thinks the boy is gifted but only 13, and that a public blunder would stain his reputation. She looks at me and suggests, in a consulting tone, that perhaps I could study a while longer. I'm not about to let him bury this. I tell Her Majesty that 300 years ago Joan of Arc broke the English army at the very age I am now. I say she proved herself through her deeds, and I ask her only to believe in my ability and give me the same chance. Orleans, dripping earnest concern, says national politics is far too weighty to be handled on confidence alone. I don't bother humoring him. I wave my hand hard and tell the Duke of Orleans not to interrupt an agreement between Her Majesty and me. Then I turn back to my mother. I ask whether, serving as assistant to the Minister of Finance, I would also be able to learn from Archbishop Brienne. Half a dozen cabinet ministers nearly swallow their tongues. They never expected the young crown prince to have the nerve to contradict the Duke of Orleans to his face. Even the chief minister usually clears his throat before crossing the man. Orleans himself is stunned that I'd give him so little face. It takes him a long moment to react before he's shouting, in real exasperation, that finance is the lifeline of France. No inexperienced youth can be allowed to meddle with it. Many of the ministers around him nod along. Seeing it, the queen looks at the determined boy in front of her and finally lands on a compromise. She says I will first take a post at City Hall, and that if I perform well, we will discuss letting me handle financial matters later. I scan the 7 or 8 ministers ringing the room and understand there's no green light coming while they're watching. So I nod and accept. Orleans wants to stir the pot further and steps up again, saying the crown prince really ought first to learn. The queen raises a hand to cut him off and tells Brienne to go on about the tax law reform. I take a seat to the side and listen to the rest of the cabinet meeting, and it teaches me exactly how deep the hole runs. 9/10 of the talk is about money, or more truthfully, about the lack of it. Afterward, the queen insists on rewarding me and drags me through a battlefield of desserts until my throat aches from the sweetness. Only then do I win my freedom. I leave the tea room with a heavy heart, and it occurs to me that maybe I could try approaching Louis XVI. At the king's chambers, I'm told he has been eating and sleeping in his locksmith workshop for 3 straight days, deep in a masterpiece of the century, and hasn't come out. Mental exhaustion rolls over me. With a father like this, how do we not end up on the guillotine? He'd only send me back to the queen anyway, a real boomerang. So I give it up with a bitter smile, shake my head, and tell a man to ready the carriage for a straight run to Paris City Hall. When I step out the main gate of Versailles, I find more than 10 carriages in the marble courtyard, 60 or 70 people standing respectfully at their sides. I nearly put a hand to my face. I recognize the type well enough. The crown prince's own dedicated retinue, beauticians and chefs and tailors and the rest. They are plainly packed to follow me to work, which is why so many carriages were readied. I have a man send the whole parade home, because hauling that circus into City Hall would turn everything into a mess. Then I look at the silver royal carriage waiting in front of me. Its body is elegantly shaped, covered in fine reliefs, every corner threaded with gold. Obscenely luxurious. I think about it and climb into a plain gray-black attendant's carriage instead. If I go out in the royal one, I can forget about any peace along the way. Soon, 3 gray-black carriages roll out of the Versailles Square and turn east. Versailles sits in the western suburbs, about 3 hours from the city center. Boredom has me yawning in the carriage until my eyes catch a stack of books on the wooden table in front of me. I pick them up to leaf through and find their files on Paris City Hall. I look at a man across from me, and he smiles at once and touches his chest in a salute. Clearly, he prepared them. To be a crown prince's steward, a man has to see 3 moves further than most. I nod to him with a smile and start reading. The material is thorough, running from City Hall's personnel structure all the way to its daily operations. When I flip to the 3rd page, I find that its subordinate departments actually include the police department. I read on quickly and confirm it, that the Paris police answer entirely to City Hall, and my eyes light up. Maybe this posting isn't a waste of time after all. At the very least, I can properly rebuild the Paris police force. For the lower classes of France, lawless streets are the second nightmare, right behind crushing taxes. Being robbed or mugged is the small stuff. Home invasions and murders and kidnappings are everyday occurrences, and the gangs who spend their days extorting citizens are a genuine cancer in Paris. On top of that, nowhere in Europe has anything like a modern police system yet. public safety still rests on citizens defending one another, so solving a crime is basically out of the question, and ordinary people live in constant fear. The meaning of rebuilding the force is therefore enormous. Solving the security problem would greatly improve social stability, and social stability would greatly blunt the nation's eventual urge to behead its royals. I finish leafing through the files, turning the details over, as the carriage rolls into Paris, and a suffocating stench of rot pours through the window. I pull the curtain aside on a whim, and my brow knots the instant I see my surroundings. I've spent every day since I arrived taking exams inside Versailles, and this is my first time seeing the face of Paris. It looks nothing like the grandest metropolis in Europe I'd pictured. The buildings are filthy and old, and the streets are paved in mud and sewage and worse. That is where the stench is born. Dead animal carcasses drift down the Seine now and again, while the workshops along the banks pour strangely colored wastewater into the river until it runs brown. Merchants sprawl their stalls across both sides of the road until the once wide street chokes to a crawl. Children fling mud and chase each other, and curses of unknown origin rise and fall. Brawls are visible everywhere, and passers-by turn a deaf ear to the screams of the beaten. There are even men committing robbery in broad daylight, and they only duck into an alley and flee once my guards move in. And this is the Louvre district, the best secured ground in all of Paris. The whole city lacks even a hint of the Enlightenment's romance, let alone any vigor of the Industrial Revolution. Magnificent Versailles glitters close at hand, yet it might as well sit in a different world. The carriage runs the north bank of the Seine. The driver gives a soft cry to bring the horses down, and we slowly halt. Eamon bows as a signal, then steps out to open my door. I climb down, rubbing a backside jolted nearly to pieces. Looking up, I see a magnificent building the better part of 100 meters wide, its outer walls crowded with statues. It is all columns and arched floor-to-ceiling windows, a massive castle squatting at the heart of Paris to proclaim the supreme power of the feudal class. City Hall already had word of my coming, and officials of every rank are gathered in the plaza out front, straining for the silver royal carriage that never appears. Only when 3 gray-black carriages stop at the entrance and Eamon climbs out does the leading man's eyelids twitch. He claps a hand to his black bicorn hat and calls out that it's the Crown Prince. That is Le Verber, the Paris Municipal Commissioner. He sets his trapezoidal legs in motion, driving his near 200 pounds forward, as he leads the crowd to me, and they bow one after another. The musicians nearby scramble into their music a half-beat late. Le Verber introduces himself, then presents a middle-aged man with gray-blue eyes and cheekbones sharp enough to pierce skin. This is the president of the Paris Chamber of Commerce, Viscount Flessels. I give that one a second look, because the files told me the truth of it. Le Verber may be municipal commissioner, the equivalent of a mayor, but the real top leader of Paris is Flessels. The government is broke and leans on the Chamber of Commerce to keep the lights on. Between that money and the Chamber's connections, its president has grown quietly enormous. Flessels bows again and says they've prepared a luncheon and would be honored by my presence. I loathe this era's banquets and balls. Every tedious rule of them is small torture, but the pleasantries can't be skipped, so I thank them all. A prince learns fast that the smile is half the job. Inside the great banquet hall of City Hall, servants stream back and forth, and any plate that cools is swept away for a fresh one. Cups clink through endless laughter while I field a river of flattery, my mind fixed the whole time on rebuilding the police. When I say I mean to take a hand in police management, Le Verber trades a startled look with Flessels. Then he smiles apologetically and protests that a prince so noble could hardly be expected to deal with thieves and murderers. Flessels nods along and calls the police department a nest of tedious trivia. Inside, though, he's cursing me. He thinks the young lord is only here to polish his reputation, and had better not be earnest about it, since if the police system tips over, then Paris tips into a riot. I feel a bit helpless. As I'm going back and forth with the two of them, a woman's high, cracking voice cuts in from outside City Hall. She's crying that Lenotre could never have killed himself, that they must catch the killer. Her voice slides from a shriek to something almost like an aria. She cries that Lenotre was so cheerful, and that they were to marry next month. So there is no way he took his own life. The case cannot be closed, while the killer is still at large. Le Verber's face darkens on the spot and he demands, angry, how she is here again. Flessels waves hard at the guards to drive her off, snapping that they should see who is present today. Then he turns back to me with a fawning smile and calls her a madwoman. Nothing to spoil my mood over. I look out the window and ask about the killer she mentioned. Le Verber says that a month ago her fiancé, Viscount Lenotre, committed suicide by swallowing a sword. He says the case is clean and settled, but that the woman seems to have gone mad and insists it was murder. He adds that she made such a scene they had to ban her from City Hall, and still she comes to shout outside every few days. I ask, a little curious, about swallowing his sword. The lean man at Leverber's right touches his chest in respect and explains the method. One braces the hilt against the ground, takes the point into the mouth, and presses down hard until the blade runs out through the back of the neck. It is a common enough way for a nobleman to die. I remember Leverber introduced him earlier as Viscount Guizot, police director of Paris, the highest man over the whole city's police. Seeing my interest, Guizot warms to the story. He says that one afternoon over a month ago, Lenotre's servant reported his master dead in his bedroom, and that when he sent men to investigate, they judged it suicide by sword. I frown and ask how he can be so certain. Was there a note, or any earlier sign the man was weary of the world? Guizot says there was none of that, but that Lenotre used his own sword, that no property was missing, and that there was no sign of a struggle. There wasn't a single other wound on the body either. He reminds me that Lenotre fought in America, that he stood 6 French feet, well past the height of an ordinary man, and was an expert in combat. If anyone could have driven a sword down his throat in daylight without leaving another mark, it could only have been the man himself. I narrow my eyes slightly because I've read this exact murder in 100 mystery novels, with no note and no sign of despair. Only an 18th century officer who never saw the inside of a police academy would stamp the word suicide on it and go home. I tell Guizot that besides the man himself, there is one other kind of person who could have done it. The fat mayor smiles and waves his hand and asks whether that person uses magic. Unhurried, I tell him no, and that the person simply knows how to work on teeth. Guizot repeats the word, stunned, asking whether I mean a dentist, and I tell him yes, a dentist. Around the table it forms behind their eyes all at once. Lenotre opens his mouth obediently at the dentist's instruction. The white surgical cloth is laid over his eyes, and the man turns to lift the sword from the wall. He runs it home without the slightest resistance, and the blood sprays out in an instant. Guizot is the first to recover. He calls a subordinate from the far end of the table, a policeman named César, and orders him to find out whether any dentist had contact with Lenotre a month ago. I add that if a dentist came to the house, the servants should know. Guizot starts to say the servant's statements never mentioned one, then stops as realization dawns. He tells César to put the servants to the question as well. Outside City Hall, the fiancé's crying has ceased. Whether the guards drove her off or someone told her the case was reopened, no one can say. By afternoon, the fat mayor sweeps in with a train of officials to carry me off to another banquet. In the middle of it, César rushes over and whispers into Guizot's ear. Guizot's eyes light up. He bows to me with a hand on his chest and announces aloud that it is exactly as I predicted. Lenotre's servant broke soon after his arrest, and admitted a dentist did visit the house at the time of the death. The servant had taken a sum of money from the man to give false testimony. Flessel asks urgently after the killer. Guizot says César searched the dentist's residence and found an Englishman whose brother had fought in America and been shot dead by Lenotre. He came for revenge, though César happened to stab the man to death during the pursuit. The dozen or so officials nearby all turned to look at me at once, surprise and admiration in their eyes. At the noon banquet, the boy named the killer's whole story off a handful of clues, and now the real investigation comes back nearly word for word. The fat mayor praises me loudly, that fortune gave France so wise a prince, so the killer did not escape justice. Then he murmurs to the officials at his back, smiling that the woman finally won't be coming to make her scenes anymore. As night falls, I accept Flessel's repeated invitations and take a room in his private villa. City Hall sits too far from Versailles for me to run back and forth. I stretch out on the broad, soft bed, staring at the far wall, a bit troubled. All day, the fat mayor and the president of the Chamber of Commerce kept dodging and deflecting, never once letting me near the actual running of the department. I roll over and decide that if I can't move them tomorrow, I'll write to the Queen and have her plant me in the police department directly. A knock at the door, Emin asks softly whether I'm asleep, and I tell him to come in. He pushes the door open and hands me a letter with great respect, saying it came from the police department and seems to have been left by Viscount Lenotre's fiancée. I ask whether the letter is really for me. Emin says heavily that she took her own life tonight to follow her lover in death. The mood in the room turns leaden. I hadn't thought a woman that devoted truly walked this world. I unfold the letter. The first few lines thank César and the other officers. Then she writes that she longed to thank the Crown Prince to his face for finding the true culprit. The vast gulf between our stations made a meeting impossible, so she thanks me this way instead. A full page of gratitude. At the end she writes that without Lenotre she has nothing left to live for. Since the police have avenged him, she'll go to him now. And after her death, all her property is to pass to the crown prince and the police department. The gift startles me. Beside me, Emin murmurs that Mademoiselle Estelle left behind a fortune of 4,000 livres. By the banks of the Seine stands the royal palace, once a palace of Louis XIV, and now the seat of the Duke of Orleans. The House of Orleans served as regents in the days of Louis XV and held immense power. After more than a century of accumulation, they hold wealth to rival the royal family itself. The present Duke has spent that foundation since his father's time, widening his influence. He holds no true official post, yet he sits in on cabinet meetings and wields real weight. With his actor's polish and his open purse, he's a welcome guest in every political circle and holds great prestige among the nobility. A luxurious carriage rolls into the royal palace and stops before a flowered gallery, and the Duke steps down onto the stairs his servants have arranged. From a garden not far off drifts the sound of a speech, and the corner of his mouth curls. He knows it for a gathering of some group that hates the royal family. Indeed, the royal palace is at present a secret base for the anti-royalists. The future core members of the Feuillants, the Girondins, and the Jacobins often gather here. Every kind of forbidden good, regulated firearms among them, changes hands under this roof. The Duke uses his power to give all of it a protective umbrella. He has tended this for decades, ready to throw his full backing behind anything that helps subvert the royal family. He tosses his coat to a servant and strides into the main hall. As the guards swing the doors, he finds his son cursing and striking a maid. He coughs lightly and asks what the matter is. The youth turns. It is the slant-eyed boy who sat the mathematics exam beside me that morning. The Duke of Charter. He jabs a finger at the maid, shrieking that the idiot brought him black tea when his mood was already foul, and that it was scalding on top of it. His father asks what soured his mood so badly. "It's that Joseph." The boy spits, fists clenched. He must have cheated. There's no way he studied university courses. The Duke draws out the whole story and can't help frowning. He never expected the crown prince to actually move a great scholar like Lagrange. He thinks the king's line finally coughed up a fool in Louis XVI. So why should the son come out so outstanding? He decides he has to press the crown prince down before that reputation can climb, or toppling the king only grows harder. He's still soothing his son when the butler hurries in and bows, announcing that Monsieur Froid begs an audience. Leverber's confidant, the Duke notes, and tells the butler to have Froid wait in the study. In the study, the Duke reads the letter Froid's brought, and a cold smile reaches his eyes. He hands the sheet to the butler at his side. He says the crown prince may have some cleverness, but is a child in the end. If the boy were merely idling around City Hall, there'd be nothing to do about him. But he has gone and taken the initiative to get himself into police management. The butler looks at the letter and clicks his tongue. He says Paris has always been a den of iniquity, the slums worst of all, where robbery and murder never cease. Even veterans with decades of experience are at their wits' end there, so the crown prince is simply asking for trouble. The Duke smiles and nods. Since Joseph is so confident they shall help him become famous. He turns to Froid and tells him to go back and have Leverber make the crown prince the police commissioner of the Saint-Antoine district. The police commissioner is a powerful post second only to the chief of police, overseeing all police affairs in one of Paris's major districts. There are only 6 such commissioners in the whole city. Once Froid has gone, the Duke instructs the butler further. He wants the Paris News and the Citizens Daily to fix their attention on the crime and policing of the Saint-Antoine district. They should write in loving detail about the man in charge there, our crown prince. The butler bows and withdraws. The Duke paces to the window, gazing out over the palace gardens in the night, a curve forming at the edge of his mouth. He mutters that when the Saint-Antoine district turns into a complete mess, they'll see how that foreign queen protects her son. Soon, in the people's hearts, the crown prince will be exactly the fool his father is. He means Queen Marie, who is Austrian by birth. Early the next morning, the moment Leverber spots the president of the Chamber of Commerce, he waves his fleshy face into a smile. After a few pleasantries, he asks what Flessels makes of the case the crown prince cracked the day before. Flessels says with feeling that the boy's intelligence simply shocked him. He truly looks forward to the day the crown prince leads France. Who wouldn't, Leverber says with a smile, and offers that on reflection His Highness seems perfectly capable of serving as a police commissioner. A little persuasion, and Flessels finally comes around. Since the crown prince wants a police post anyway, it's better to do him the favor. So the moment I walk through the city hall gates, the fat mayor is on me. All smiles. He tells me that old Similian, the police commissioner of the Saint-Antoine district, went on a long sick leave yesterday. and he wonders whether I'd care to become the commissioner. Flessels echoes the name of the Saint Antoine district, thrown for a second. He lowers his head to mutter to Leverber that he never said it was there, that the place is too chaotic. Leverber murmurs back, low, that the Crown Prince won't be out on patrol, so nothing will happen. Flessels wants to say more, but the mayor blocks him and assures me that Similian's people are all seasoned hands. I'm mildly surprised how fast the two of them have flipped their tune, but I take it and accept the position at once. A police commissioner runs all the policing of a whole district, with only the police director above him, and City Hall was never going to make a boy the director. Leverber lays on another round of flattery, escorts me all the way to the police department, and watches the appointment documents issued. Only then does he leave, satisfied. I don't waste a minute. With Police Director Guizot and his men escorting me in person, I drive straight for the Saint Antoine district to take office. An hour and more on the road, and the surrounding scenery drops several grades into ruin. The people who pass wear numb faces, and rickety makeshift shacks crowd every gap. Foul-smelling homeless men slump in the corners, half the shops are shuttered, and vendors are few and far between. Only the streetwalkers in cheap clothes, half-heartedly working the passers-by, put any life in the place. Not far into the district, I see protection money changing hands more than once. Then two gangs trade blows in the street, blood on the stones, while everyone nearby drops their heads and hurries off. From first to last, not one officer appears. Guizot takes it all as perfectly ordinary and only talks brightly about balls, even pushing me to attend a certain masquerade next month. No wonder this was the first place to riot during the revolution. Pack people into squalor like this for a few years, salt it with extreme poverty, and every chest fills with a lifetime of resentment. When it finally explodes, the destructive force is terrifying. I let out a long breath, and I know that coming to the Saint Antoine district was the right call. Half an hour on, the carriage stops before a small courtyard fenced with uneven wooden planks. Inside sits a rundown building without so much as a sign. Guizot gestures eagerly out the window that this is the Saint Antoine District Police Station. An officer in the yard sees the police director himself and bolts inside to report. A moment later, several officials lead a crowd out to greet us. Guizot bows to me first, then faces the assembly and clears his throat. He announces that His Honorable Highness the Crown Prince has arrived and will serve from now as their police commissioner, while his aide holds up the appointment papers. The whole station stands stunned and lost. They wonder why so great a figure has come to their little place, whether the Crown Prince is really only 13, and whether the station is about to be turned into a mess. After a long silence, a tall, thin man with sunken eyes steps forward and bows low. He says my arrival brings honor to their humble station, and Assistant Police Commissioner Bono welcomes me on behalf of everyone here. He turns to introduce the others. He says this is Marconi, Public Order Inspector of the 2nd Squad, and this the Inspector of the 3rd, and on down the line. Each hurries forward to bow, and I smile and return every one. The files had already told me the Assistant Commissioner is second in command. The Public Order Inspectors command the deployments and patrols, a dozen odd men under each, the middle managers of the force. Bonnot and the rest escort me in, and Marconi leans close, all admiration. He says he heard from Caesar that I solved a murder in just over 10 minutes yesterday, and that it makes veterans of 10 years feel ashamed. I hadn't expected the news to reach Saint Antoine so fast, and I brush it off with a few modest words. Inside the crumbling building, I frown at the crowd of police pressing at my heels. I tell them not to follow, to see to their duties, and I send Guizot off of them. The surroundings finally quiet down. Led by Bonnot, I reach the commissioner's office, look around, and settle behind the large oak desk. He asks, fawning, whether I'll have tea or hot cocoa, and offers to lay on a banquet at once. I wave it away and ask him instead for the files on the jurisdiction, along with the case records and the personnel rolls. He's plainly surprised. He'd taken me for a boy come to play a few days, and here I am in deadly earnest. The documents come fast. I flipped only a few pages when my brow knots. In the last month alone, the Saint Antoine district has logged 28 murders, 63 robberies, and 220 thefts, and the district holds only 80,000 souls. Those are the reported cases too, with no telling how many never reached a desk. The situation is far worse than I'd feared. I pick up the personnel rolls next. There are 181 officers in all of the district, 120 of whom bought their posts, and only 61 who came in through inheritance or recruitment. On top of that are civilian patrol teams totaling over 200 men. The documentaries told me the most common thing the Paris police do these days is extort. They squeeze whoever they catch, vendors and criminals and victims alike, and get around to fighting crime when they have a free afternoon. A man has to earn back the price of his post first, after all. So order rests mostly on the civilian patrols, unpaid volunteers with crude weapons and no power of arrest. They are good only to frighten a thug, never to hold him. Which leaves maybe 60 recruited men as the only force worth the name. Working through the rest of the files, I find these officers haven't seen a full wage in 4 months. 2/10 of their pay comes from City Hall and the other 8 from the Chamber of Commerce. But the chamber routinely fails to raise enough because the merchants won't cooperate. So the men come up short. 60-some people to police a district of 80,000 and unpaid on top of it. No wonder there are 28 murders in a month. No wonder that when the revolution came and crowds poured into Les Invalides to seize muskets, not a soul stood in their way. People are the ground everything else stands on. It seems the first job is to solve the manpower. I sit with it a long while, pulling advanced policing ideas out of the future, one by one. I fill a full 4 or 5 pages with a framework for rebuilding the force, before I finally let out a long breath. I set down the pen and glance at the first line I'd written. Reorganize the civil patrol. Then I summon the assistant police commissioner, Bonat, and tell him to gather every officer and every civil patrolman of the district here tomorrow morning. He repeats the word back, startled, and I confirm that I mean every last one, and that I'll have Viscount Guizot move men from other districts to cover the patrols. Then I turn to a man and tell him to send for 20,000 livres, drawn from my private estate. When the sun comes up again, near 400 officers and civil patrolmen stand in 2 ragged formations in the open ground. Before the police department, they were told they'd meet the Crown Prince, their new superior. Still, the sight of the handsome young man on the wooden platform in a red double-breasted uniform and a tricorn hat sets them tense. At exactly 9 o'clock, to the beat of military drums, I raise a hand. I tell them I don't like wasting words, that I have only 3 points, and that they should listen well. My voice is a boy's, but I make it carry. First, from this day, every civil patrol in the district is folded into the police department as a true official officer, and any man who doesn't want it won't be forced. The civil patrolmen erupt into a commotion. A police post costs 500 livres to buy, and on one offhand remark from the Crown Prince, they've all become official officers. The police name isn't much loved in Paris, but it's still a government post with standing. These poor men who banded together only to protect themselves had never once dreamed of it. A truly meteoric rise. I signal for quiet and go on. Second, everyone will be assessed on character, physical strength, and professional skill, then graded into police ranks like the armies. There are 3 grades each, of constable, sergeant, and inspector, with pay climbing as rank rises. A constable begins as a trainee at 18 livres a month. First, second, and third grade constables draw 22, 25, and 30, while a sergeant starts at 40. I point at the several wooden crates nearby. I say there sits 20,000 livres, and that the moment ranks are set, this month's wages are paid. From now on, wages are paid here in cash, without a single day's delay. The crowd breaks again. 30 livres nearly matches a city hall official. 22 buys a comfortable life, and it's cash. The old police wage was only 16 and often deducted until barely more than half reached a hand. Every eye is bright with the gleam of silver coins. They'll fight tooth and nail for that assessment, because a third-grade constable's grade saves them 20 years of clawing. The ones with bellies straining their coats look down at themselves and start to sweat. Third, cutting through their thoughts, I tell them there will be a performance system. Monthly reviews will weigh case-solving rates, response volume, and complaint counts, with bonuses for good work and cuts for bad. Rank and promotion will rest heavily on the results. I look them over and tell them I'm finished, that I trust we're agreed. Reorganization and assessment begin here and now, and must be done within 10 days. A thunderous roar comes back from below the platform. The former civil patrolmen are flushed to the ears, their hands trembling, shouting long life to the Crown Prince one over another. An ordinary morning has turned their fates over, and their lives will plainly run bright with hope from here. In their hearts, I've already become something close to a savior. Hundreds of men are silently swearing to work themselves to the bone to repay my kindness. Several of my guards jog over and start carving the crowd into ranks, dozens of men at a time. To later eyes, my measures would seem commonplace, but in the 18th century, they are the furthest edge of the art. Unified organization, specialized jobs, performance review, pay by merit, every one of them a revolutionary improvement. By the real history, it would be decades before the brilliant Napoleon began his own police reforms. Even doing less than half of this, he became a model all of Europe followed. 2 days later, the residents of the district notice many new things. On every street corner hangs a wooden box slit at the top. Police complaint box painted large across it. Small print beneath explains that any grievance against the police may be written and dropped inside. The commissioner himself will review and handle it, and the results will be posted at once. In many crowded quarters, carpenters are throwing up rows of wooden frames. By the carpenter's word, they are sentry boxes the police department requested. Officers will stand ready there at every hour of the day and night to reinforce the patrols. 3 days later, in the municipal commissioner's office, Froys watches Le Verber with a worried face. He says the Duke of Orleans meant only for the Crown Prince to lose face, yet the boy is making quite a name instead, and the men's morale runs high. Le Verber carefully picks a bottle from the wine cabinet and tells Froys to relax, that someone will take care of it. Froy asks who that someone is. Le Verber admires the purple liquid against the light and answers slowly. He says he let the news of the Crown Prince's movements spread yesterday, and that he suspects certain people already can't sit still. Right then, Guizot knocks and comes in, bows carelessly, urgent. He says the mayor must go and advise the Crown Prince. Le Verber draws out his corkscrew and asks, all deliberate innocence, what he is to advise the boy on. Guizot grinds his leather boot on the floor. He demands whether Le Verber has heard that His Highness has changed the police force beyond recognition and that it will wreck the security of the district. He lays out the reorganization and adds, sour-faced, that if anyone else had done this, he'd have fired the man long ago. But this is the Crown Prince, so what can he do? Le Verber works the cork free, breathes in the aroma, and shakes his head. He says the Crown Prince's doings are internal matters of the police department and hard for him to touch. Besides, he's been strapped for funds lately, and with all these new officers, nearly half the department's budget will have to flow to Saint Antoine. Guizot is aghast. He exclaims that the Crown Prince can't be allowed to swallow that much funding, and that Le Verber must help him find a way. Le Verber makes a show of being troubled, ponders a while, then pours a glass and hands it over, a subtle smile slipping into his eyes. He says there is room to maneuver. For instance, if Guizot could make the Crown Prince back down, he'll do his best to cooperate here. Guizot gives him a long, deep look, drains the wine in one gulp, nods firmly, and leaves with a dark expression. Once the door shuts, Froy asks, surprised, how Le Verber knew Guizot would come. Le Verber hands him another glass and smiles. The Crown Prince has some ability but is a child in the end, seeing only what's in front of him and blind to the consequences that follow. Froy echoes the word back, and Le Verber takes a sip and explains. Beyond the chamber's funding, the force's largest income is the commission from selling police posts. He spread word that the Crown Prince is promoting commoners into officers. So anyone who meant to buy a post now guesses that Paris posts may soon cost nothing. And who would pay at a time like that? That's the fattest source of profit those men have. On top of it, he'll withhold a share of City Hall's allotment to Guizot and watch them all go frantic. He asks what they will do then, and Froy's eyes light up as he answers that they'll do everything they can to stop the Crown Prince. Le Verber only nods that it is exactly so. Guizot's carriage reaches the Saint Antoine district station as the sun goes down. In my office, he bows respectfully and flatters me that with this reorganization, the force is practically brand new. Then he puts on his worried look again. He says those civilian patrolmen I folded in barely know how to use a sword and have never touched a crossbow or a musket. They'll need 3 or 4 months of training at least, or they won't handle the thugs on the street. And through those months, he goes on, no one covers the patrols they were meant to walk. The 120-odd officers I had him borrow from other districts are needed back soon, since the pressure there is high too. I wave him to a seat and smile. I tell him it won't take nearly so long, because I have a simple method to finish combat training in about 10 days. Surely borrowing the men for 10 days or so is no problem. Guizot stiffly grants the point, but says training is important and mustn't be handled carelessly. I thank him for the reminder and tell him I know exactly what I'm doing. He nods stiffly, still unwilling to give it up, and raises one more thing. He says I've suddenly brought in over 200 officers, and that the department can't provide equipment for that many. I tell him not to trouble himself over the equipment, that I'll handle it myself. The carefully prepared problem dies in his hands that easily. He drags up a few more objections to the reforms. They land nowhere, and at last he takes his leave resentfully. His mind is a mess the whole way, certain the Crown Prince means to throw the department into chaos, and certain the allotment left for him will come to little. In fact, he's overthinking it. I don't care in the slightest about the department's meager scraps. Leaning a police force on private merchant money was never anything but broken to begin with. And with the technologies and advanced ideas I carry from the future, I have no shortage of ways to make money. I mean to plug the 2 billion livre round of France's foreign debt, so keeping a police force fed is a trifle beside that. In his carriage, Guizot's gaze turns cold. He resolves to kick the boy out of the police system as fast as he can, and put everything back the way it was. Not long after Guizot leaves, two exquisite carriages pull up at the station. Louis XVI's valet steps down, fits a gold-rimmed monocle to his eye, and frowns at the ruin of a station. Before hurrying inside with his servants, he completes the full court etiquette before me, then hands over a letter with great respect, saying it comes from His Majesty the King. He gestures for a servant to open an exquisite wooden chest. He says the Queen learned I hadn't even brought a royal chef, and fearing I wouldn't eat well, she had these made for me. I look into the chest and find it filled with cakes, strawberry pies, cream puffs, and candies of every kind. One glance is enough to drown me in sweetness, but I know it for Queen Marie's plain. Whole love. I break the wax seal and unfold the letter, seeing Louis XVI's elegant, flowing italic hand. He pours out all his longing and warmth, and a father's deep care. He has finished the salamander water spout at last, and he swears to the Lord it is the finest work of art, with a long, fond description of the lock to follow. When it was done, he writes, the first person he wanted to show was me. Only then did he learn I'd gone off to work at City Hall, and he's so sorry, buried in the workshop too long to know. He asks how I am faring in Paris, and how my mother could let a boy of 13 suffer so, when this is work for Brienne and the others. He heard I'd finished the university courses and can scarcely believe it. He writes that I'm the pride of the whole royal family, and that he's certain I'll restore France to its glory, in the days of the Sun King. He goes on praising for a full page. He's heard I'm reforming the police department and doing well, so he tells me to go and do just as I please. If any problems arise, he'll cover for me, and he'll always stand behind me. If I feel tired, I should hurry back to Versailles, because my mother frets that I'm not eating. At the very end, he tells me that no matter where I am, I'll always be his dearest son, and he sends 1,000 kisses. For all the French sentiment laid on thick, the fatherly love in it is real, and I feel it fully. In my old life, my parents were never in good health, and they passed one after the other while I was still at university. It has been a long time since I felt the warmth of family. Right now, my chest is full of that warmth, and I find myself hoping I can live long and peaceful with these people in this life. 10 days since I took over the force, and dust hangs over the open ground before the station. Over 200 fresh officers in crisp blue uniforms and blue and white wide-brimmed hats sweat through their drills with oddly shaped weapons. I had the uniforms procured from the army camped in the Paris suburbs for several thousand livres. Across France and across all of Europe, police dress as they please, and no such thing as a uniform exists. In appearance alone, my Saint Antoine men are decades ahead. For weapons, I passed on muskets, which without 6 months of hard training are little better than fire pokers. I didn't hand out many swords either. Instead, I had carpenters make over 200 Y-shaped wooden forks, each about 2 meters long, and gave every 2 men a shield between them. They look crude, but they're brutally practical. The very kit the security guards of a later age carry at their stations and airports. Paired with the right formation, the riot control effect is superb. These men, drawn from the lowest rungs of Paris society, prize their new standing. Though they drill 10 hours a day, not one of them complains. I look over the training ground, satisfied. By the plan, from noon today, this brand new force takes over the security of the whole district. Criminal cases still rest with the original 60 veteran officers. As for the men who bought their posts, I've folded them into a logistics team for chores like cleaning and hauling. Their pay at the lowest tier. The station now runs 50 criminal investigators, 236 patrol officers, and 125 utility workers. It counts as a formidable body even by the measure of all Paris. And these 280 odds of the main force are high-spirited and full of morale, with none of the thuggish air found in other districts' police. Where the old police lived by extortion, these men can truly hold the line. For sheer sense of responsibility, one of them is worth 8 of the old. You could call it a modern police force in the truest sense of the word. Under a bright sun, after lunch, at my command near 300 officers shout their slogans and march out of the station in formation. The takeover of the district's security officially begins. They've patrolled this ground before and know exactly where trouble is likely to brew, so they're experienced. Now, with real official standing and an advanced management model, their grip on crime multiplies. The citizens have long since heard the news, but past a few extra glances at the stylish uniforms, they pay it little mind. What has a Frenchman ever expected of the police? Curses and roars boil out of a back alley on Rue Auray, on the eastern side of the district. 4 or 5 burly men in black vests and felt hats have a middle-aged man cornered, brandishing wooden clubs and iron axes. They snarl that he dared owe money to the Viper Gang, and ask whether he's tired of living. The man huddles in fear and begs for another week, for God's sake. A red-haired man smirks cold that he's already missed 3 protection payments this year, and that by the rules they have to teach him a lesson. Before the man can finish pleading, one of them swings a club hard against his arm. The bone gives way under it, and the scream that follows hardly sounds human. The red-haired man grinds a foot into him where he writhes. He says to remember next week, and that if he's late again, it'll be the other hand. Then 4 figures in blue uniforms and wide-brimmed hats step into the mouth of the alley, looking at the man on the ground. The red-haired man knows 2 of them and drawls that Baptiste and Killian became policemen after all, that the clothes fit them quite well. Those 2 were civilian patrolmen once and know the Viper Gang by sight. He brandishes his knife and tells them he's collecting a debt here to get out of his way. Quillian suddenly pulls a whistle and blows it hard. Then he points at the men and shouts that this is assault in the street, and he's placing them all under arrest. Quillian was a tanner. To keep his family safe, he'd volunteered for the patrol, walking the neighborhood every evening from 6 until 11 at night. When he met men like the Viper Gang, he usually stepped aside if he could. But now he's a genuine officer on a high wage of 35 livres a month. His wife and 2 children eat white bread daily and meat every few days, a scenario that used to live only in his dreams. Now he wants one thing: to hold this district, guard the small happiness he's won, and repay the Crown Prince. Every criminal he takes lifts his performance score too, and the higher the score, the higher the bonus. He and the other 3 shout together, "In the name of the Crown Prince," and charge. The red-haired man snorts disdainfully and waves his lackeys on, sure of it. In his experience, even the police are all bluster, cowards who weep and run at the first sight of blood. This time he's wrong. 3 officers swing the 2-meter Y-forks off their backs, step up as one, and pin the 2 charging Viper men at the waist. The 4 kids run a full arm's length across, near impossible to miss, the riot control waist fork of a later age. A 4th officer with a spear sees his moment and drives it through the left man's foot. The man howls and rolls, clutching it, while his neighbor bares his teeth and hacks with a short sword. The blade is caught on a fork before it can reach anyone. The red-haired man throws himself in, furious at the head of his 4, and the forks hold them off while 2 more of his men take spears in the calves. A decade of knife fighting on the edge, and it's all worthless against this strange formation. It's the security combat method I taught them, the kind used at the stations and airports of a later age, built not to kill but only to pin. It gives generous room for self-defense besides, and it's simple enough that any man masters it in a week. The red-haired man can't fathom why the police are so hard to handle today. Soon, nearly run through himself, he gives it up, throws up a hand, and shouts to retreat. But a security kiosk half a street off heard the whistle and sent 4 men. They meet the Viper Gang head-on in the narrow alley. The lead officer shouts the cry in the name of the Crown Prince, and 3 riot control waist forks come level in an instant. The Viper Gang puts up only a token fight before wooden forks pin them to the ground from both sides, and they whimper in terror. Quillian thanks the men who came to back him and binds the thugs one by one with rope. All day, the same scene plays out across the district. The officers fired up as if a fever had them. They charge at any crime with their shout in the name of the Crown Prince, teaching the lowlifes hard lessons with waist forks and spears. For a time, the thieves and muggers and gangsters of the district are wretched, flinching at every sound, their old arrogance snuffed out. The residents watch the police crack down street by street, surprised and delighted. Notorious gangsters and violent men are hauled in one after another, and they've never seen police keep order in earnest before. These people ask very little of public safety, counting themselves merely unlucky when robbed, and content so long as their lives aren't in danger. The new force has already blown clean past everything they expected. Soon they begin, on their own, to bring the officers water and food. They cheer the men through the streets as they take criminals, which drives them to work harder still. Before long, the citizens learn a trick of their own. Shouting in the name of the Crown Prince at the sight of a crime will very often scare a thug off outright. At the Royal Palace, the Duke of Orleans stares sourly at the Paris News on his desk. Its front page announces chaos in the Saint Antoine district under the Crown Prince's police reform. Against his own paper's careful vagueness, the nearby tabloids run blunter still. They trumpet that the Crown Prince has overhauled the policing, that the district citizens praise their new force, that his brilliant strategy cracked the dentist murder in 3 minutes. Irritation rises in him. He'd meant to use the district's lawlessness to let the papers shred the crown prince, and instead he's handed the boy a reputation. To remake a police force in 10 days is no work of a 13-year-old. Then he frowns. Could that foreign queen be using her son's hand to launch a purge of the Paris officialdom, starting from the police department? The more he turns it over, the surer he feels, since the boy alone could never have done all this. That only makes it more vital to wreck the queen's design, because the royal family cannot be allowed to gain any ground. He thinks a while, writes a quick letter, and calls his butler. He tells him to carry it to Reborn and see it done at any cost, and that he might see about making the man governor of Normandy. In a small villa on the east bank of the Seine, Guizot squints at the door left ajar. He calls to the mistress eavesdropping outside to shut it and keep the servants away. Anna reluctantly closes the door and drifts off, muttering that he treats her practically like a maid, and this her own house after all. Guizot turns back to the short, curly-haired man before him and drags on his pipe. He says that this time the crown prince isn't here to play a few days before going home to Versailles, but means to stay at the police department for good. The short man is old Similian, the former Saint Antoine commissioner, who has been on his convenient sick leave. He says anxiously that the municipal commissioner promised he'd be reinstated in 2 months at most. On a breath of smoke, Guizot says no, one could have known it would go like this. Right now it isn't only Similian who suffers, and the crown prince has become a headache for the whole department. He fixes on the man and says there's a job now. If it's done well, Similian won't only win his post back, but might even climb higher. Joy flashes in the short man's eyes, and he begs Guizot only to give the order. Guizot asks who the most powerful gangs in the district are, since Similian knows the ground best. Similian names the Horse Gang and the Black Sheep Gang, which hold better than 80% of the district between them, 100-odd lackeys to each. Guizot nods, draws out a slip of paper, and hands it over with a wild light in his eyes. He tells Similian to find the gangs and set them loose. Murder or assault or kidnapping or arson, anything goes, so long as they throw the district into chaos. He wants the situation spiraling past all control, complete and total. Similian's pupils shrink at the words. After a long pause, he nods and agrees to bring the whole district down. Then he glances at the paper and jumps out of his chair, losing his voice at the sight of 30,000 livres. The slip is a bank draft for 30,000 livres. 20,000 buys a villa in Paris these days, so 30,000 is a fortune that could drive any gang wild. Guizot says this bit of money is nothing, waving him back into his seat. He tells Similian to promise the gangs 1,000 livres for every act that sparks panic. Another 20,000 goes a month from now to whoever performs best. Similian's hands tremble slightly. Guizot tells him to go and handle it, then gives him one more heavy look. If any accidents happen, the great men behind him will clean it up. But all of this was Similian's own idea and has nothing to do with him. Similian swears he understands and tells Guizot to rest easy. Guizot stands at the window watching him hurry off, a cold sneer curling his lip. He hadn't originally meant to play it this big, but yesterday, Reborn told him to go ahead and that he'd cover anything that came of it, so he shed his last misgiving. He mutters that it would have been so pleasant for the crown prince to enjoy his life at Versailles, and instead the boy insisted on wading into these muddy waters. 3 days later, at the Saint Antoine district station, I'm under a tree working through citizen complaint letters, most of which are really praise for the police. Then Marconi comes running, salutes, and gasps that something has happened again. 2 people were killed at a shoe store on White Iris Street, and the shop was burned to the ground. My brow tightens at once. Since the afternoon, 2 days ago, a run of violent crimes has hit the district. 2 dead the day before yesterday, 3 dead yesterday, 2 badly hurt. I'd taken them for isolated incidents, until now. I ask where matters stand. Marconi says Alden has taken men there, that the fire is out but the criminals still aren't caught. I go straight back to my office and start moving personnel onto the case. As dusk comes on, Alden returns with progress on the White Iris Street fire and begins his report. Then another officer brings worse news. The Black Sheep Gang has gone mad for no reason anyone can name, hacking people up and down Nisangla Street. 7 or 8 passers-by are already wounded, and the officers there urgently need reinforcements. Something about this is wrong, and I say so under my breath over the pile of reports. I ask Alden whether every gang in the Saint Antoine district has lost its mind these past few days. Then I give the orders, effective at once. Every shift runs longer from here on, and because that is hard on the men, I double their performance bonuses, and the night patrols get reinforced above all. since I can feel more trouble coming. Alden snaps a hand to his chest and turns to go, but the official in charge of police personnel stumbles in first, sweating through his coat. He tells me a great many officers have suddenly filed for leave, close to 100 of them. Alden goes pale, because the district force runs only about 400 men all told. Main body and support staff together, which means a full quarter of it is walking out the door at once. They all claim illness, the official says, or family emergencies. Every excuse under the sun. I take the leave list and scan it, and they are all veterans, the logistics people making up the bulk of it, with a dozen-odd criminal investigators mixed in. Worse, the man leading the exodus is the department's own second-in-command, Bonat. How convenient. I don't believe in coincidences. My eyes narrow. Violent crime is spiking. I have just called for total mobilization, and right on cue, a quarter of my force calls in sick. Someone is digging me a pit. I hand the list to Eamon, cold. I tell him to take a doctor and check them one by one, and to fire on the spot any man whose condition doesn't match the reason he wrote down. Eamon promises to see it done. A pit for me. Fine. It will at least save a fortune in salaries. A mere 100 men, and they truly think I'm helpless. I send Alden, Marconi, and the other public order inspectors out with their teams to hold the streets. Then I signal the captain of the Crown Prince's Guard, Viscount Cassad, who has been standing 5 paces off. I ask how many of my guards are on hand, and he answers at once that there are 105. On the surface, only 2 or 3 men ever shadow me. But the truth is that within 300 paces, a whole detachment of the Crown Prince's Guard stays on alert around me at all times. I tell him to peel off 90 of them to follow Marconi and keep order in the streets. Cassad stands ramrod straight and objects that this breaks the rules. I tell him, smiling, that rules are made by people and he shouldn't be so rigid, and that besides, he is my guard, so there is nothing wrong in his listening to me. His face is all military stubbornness. He says his duty is my safety, and that he is certain His Majesty the King would never approve of such a thing. So I give him a cunning smile, pull out the letter Louis XVI sent me days ago, and hand him the last page, telling him I do in fact have the King's blessing. His eyes go wide. I point to the line in my father's own hand, where the King wrote that I should simply go ahead and do it, and that if problems arise he will cover for me. That is His Majesty's own writing, I tell Cassad, and he is bound to obey it. Cassad is stunned and starts to protest, so I add the threat that if he won't listen I will lead the patrol myself, and he has heard for himself what the streets are like. He hurries to stop me, insisting I absolutely cannot go out on patrol, and after a short standoff he caves with a bitter face. He sets 2 conditions: that Major Fersen must never hear of this, and that I must not leave the station. Fersen is the captain of the palace guard at Versailles, and Cassad's own superior. I take the deal, and remind him I still keep 15 men here, so my safety is no issue. Cassad salutes again, strides out to the open ground, pulls a whistle from his pocket, and blows it twice. Hard. In a heartbeat, over 100 of the Crown Prince's Guard converge from every direction with swords and rifles, falling into 5 ranks with frightening speed. He gives a handful of officers their low-voiced orders, and they lead their men out at a run. 10 cavalry among them. The confessions fill in the rest of it for me later. In a filthy house deep in the district, reeking of foot sweat and sour vomit, the leaders of the Black Sheep gang are drinking and laughing. One of them brags about the women of White Laurel. The Grand Chief sneers that the man has never seen the world, that the real stock is in the Louvre district, at 30 livres a night. Valien, the second leader, missing half his left ear, boasts that they have pulled in 2,000 livres these past few days. Someone mocks him at once for losing 150 of it at the casino. Valien waves a copy of the Paris News back at them, crowing that word of him burning the shoe shop made the papers. With the crooked cops a million sending 1,000 livres over tomorrow, he says, none of them need worry about brothel money. The Grand Chief tells them all to stop thinking with their trousers and work harder to win the 20,000 livres, and then he'll take them to play with real noble girls. The leaders howl their agreement, boasting the horse gang is nothing and the 20,000 is already theirs. Ever since Semillian promised 1,000 livres for every major crime 3 days ago, the Black Sheep gang has been under death orders and heavy rewards to make chaos at any cost. Plenty of their underlings have been taken, yet they have also made a fortune. They drink themselves to sleep dreaming on it. At sunrise, a pounding on the door jolts them awake, a voice crying that some of the brothers are dead. The Grand Chief drags himself up, hungover, snapping that a few dead men is nothing and demanding to know whether it was the horse gang or the police. The voice outside trembles that it was neither, that it was the Royal Guard, and 3 men are down. He kicks his sprawled subordinates awake and sends them out. Before they get far, they see a squad of royal guards across the street in fine uniforms and feathered tricorn hats, royal emblems on their chests, heavily armed and marching with an imposing air. Valiant asks nervously what they are doing in the district, and the messenger says, with a long face, that they seem to be holding order, that there are many of them on nearly every street. The gangmen are still talking when a commotion breaks out nearby, a robbery in broad daylight. The royal guards charge over, shouting for the men to get down or be shot. But two horse gang thugs ignore them, cut the victim down with a blade, and bolt for an alley without a backward look. These guards are nothing like the ragged police, for every man carries a musket and wears a breastplate. They form up, level their guns, and the leader shouts a last warning. The robbers throw an insulting gesture over their shoulders and run harder, because in their whole experience, boldness and speed have always been enough. This time they are facing the most elite guard in France. At the command, the muskets fire together, and the two thugs are flung forward with palm-sized holes torn through their backs. That precise shooting and the flat, decisive readiness to kill make the black sheep men shrink into their collars. They don't even check they're fallen. They only run back to warn their boss. The guard sweeps the district like some invincible beast, and by a little after 10 in the morning, 6 gang members have already tasted their bullets. The 2 gangs that strutted everywhere yesterday suddenly wither. This is the order I gave, that if a man is caught committing a crime and cannot be taken alive, they are to shoot him dead. Severe sickness needs harsh medicine, and without blood to frighten these people, there is no telling how many more citizens die. This is an age of royal power, not a courtroom that frets over a criminal's rights. And there are no bleeding hearts here. I don't enjoy it. I also don't intend to bury more shopkeepers to keep my own conscience soft. The horse gang leader huddles in his hideout, watching the tall guards pass through a gap in the curtain, his eyelid twitching, as runners keep bringing word of men arrested or shot. In a single day, he loses 17, and he whines that he is only a common thug, and wonders aloud whether it really takes an army to crush him. The black sheep react a little faster and pull everyone back by noon, losing about 10. For the next 2 days, not a single violent crime happens in the district, because Similian's money is good but the royal guard plays for keeps, and coin is worth nothing to a dead man. When word of the retreat reaches the station, the men are thrilled, praising my nerve and the guard's power. But I don't care about the flattery. I know very well the guard has only frightened the gangs with thunder for a moment, and before long they will find the seams. They don't know the district, and they know nothing of criminal investigation. Most of the guard are titled knights besides, and left on street patrol too long they will go slack from low morale. You can play the thief for 1,000 days, but you cannot guard against a thief for 1,000 days. If I don't find the mastermind, the big cases come back. Alden knocks and enters, bows, and reports that everyone they have hauled in has talked, all of them small fry. But many say the same thing, that for each job someone hands their leader 1,000 livres, and they take a healthy cut. I frowned inwardly. Crimes for cash, 1,000 a time, and whoever is paying is a generous soul indeed. I tell Alden to keep questioning them, and a guard officer comes in and bows, saying they've caught a man named Valian whose standing seems unusual. Alden lights up, telling me Valian is the second in command of the Black Sheep Gang. The officer explains he was brawling in a gambling house and tried to run, and that his men shot 3 of Valian's before the fellow screamed his own name and saved his skin. Alden swallows, a flicker of pity crossing his face, then says Valian may know something, and he will go question him now. In under an hour, Alden comes rushing back, not even stopping to wipe the blood off himself, and lays a confession in front of me and calls it a breakthrough. Valiant's statement names a man called Raymond, who has been throwing money around to make chaos, 1,000 livres an incident. Another 20,000 is promised after a month to whichever of the 2 gangs makes the bigger splash. I ask what this Raymond does. Alden doesn't know, but a clerk nearby says, surprised, that Raymond is Mr. Similian's cousin. The name is familiar, and the clerk tells me Similian is the former police commissioner of this district. Then I understand. No wonder 100 officers filed for leave in a single breath. The mastermind is their old chief, and it all lines up. Alden, who came up from the civilian patrol and doesn't feel the deeper currents, asks whether we should arrest Similian. I am about to nod when something stops me, and I ask the clerk what Similian earned. He says 30 livres a month. When I ask whether the man comes from a great family, he says no. An ordinary one, the father a minor clerk. My eyes narrow. On that salary, it would take a man over 50 years to save 20,000 livres. So where did he get such a sum? Alden startles. I say slowly that there is someone else behind him, giving the orders. Alden thinks, Then remembers Valian mentioned that Raymond flashed a deposit slip for 20,000 livres to prove he could pay, drawn on the Halfray Bank. A real clue at last. I check the map and find Halfray is a small house with only 2 branches in Paris. I start to send Emin and Alden, then shake my head. Never mind. I will go myself. At the Halfray branch nearer City Hall, the manager refuses to open the accounts. Then I show him who I am and promise to turn the secret police loose on him, if he won't cooperate. And he folds. Similian's account is almost bare, for he cashed a bill of exchange for 30,000 livres and split it into a handful of deposits, one of them exactly 20,000. I sigh to myself at how thin these people's sense of a money trail is in this century. Then I get the one thing I wanted most. The man who drew that bill of exchange is the Paris police chief himself, Viscount Guizot. The chief of police, quietly financing a crime wave against his own city. Of course he is. I leave 2 guards on the bank manager so he can't warn anyone, and leave my people out of the Halfray Bank. Alden urges me to let him arrest Guizot at once, but I raise a hand to stop him, because Guizot only handed Similian 30,000 livres, and there is not a shred of proof he was behind the rest. Alden counters that we should arrest Similian instead, since he might give up Guizot. I had not expected the man at the bottom of this to be the police commissioner of Paris himself, and I frowned. Guizot's position is delicate, and if he simply refuses to confess, Similian's word alone will never convict him. E-Man glances at the darkening sky and suggests we head back to our lodgings first, and something clicks. I ask whether Valian was taken close to dusk, so the news won't reach City Hall before tomorrow morning. Alden nods, saying the man is only a thug and no one cares about him. Good. I climb into the carriage, lean over the little table to write a letter, and hand it to Cassad. I ask him to send a writer to Versailles to put it in Her Majesty the Queen's own hands, and to make it fast. 4 in the morning. The Queen's secretary, Count Herman, arrives at the St. Antoine station with the secret police commissioner, Antoine, both of them yawning. Before they can even offer their greetings, I have hot cocoa brought and steer them into their seats. Herman asks what is so urgent as to drag them out here. There is indeed something I need from them both, I tell them, and I lean in to lay out the plan. Herman's eyes go wide, and he warns that if it is handled badly, the whole thing could turn. But Antoine is all confidence, telling me to leave it to him and that there will be no accidents. My method is so good, he says, that he means to add the case to the secret police's training curriculum. I bow to them, and they tell me it is their honor to serve. Dawn. Guizot climbs into his carriage, yawning, tosses his cane to a servant, and waves lazily to move off. The way it comes back to me afterward, in Herman's account and Alden's, it goes like this. The carriage rolls off along the cobbles. Guizot's house sits a fair way from City Hall, so he settles back for another nap, only for the driver to yell and the carriage to jerk to a halt. He wrenches the window open, irritated, and the door is torn open from outside. 3 big men in tattered leather hats and black vests, foul-smelling, crowd the doorway, and when his bodyguard reaches for his sword, he finds a short blade already at his throat. A thin-faced man with knuckly hands jerks his chin and tells everyone out. The servant and bodyguard climb down, and Guizot is shoved back into his seat and told not to move. The 3 men swing up into the carriage, and the one with the blade pulls the door shut and tells the driver to keep going and act as if nothing has happened. The carriage starts again, and the fear drops off Guizot's face at once. He leans back and says coldly that he knows this man, that he is Valian, and asks who sent him. As police commissioner, he keeps a rough memory of the city's famous gang leaders, and he had seen this one missing half his left ear once last year, the second of the Black Sheep gang. Valian's eyes flick to the thin man on the left, and he mumbles head down that his subordinate will do the talking. The thin man drags the flat of his knife back and forth across his stubble, squinting at Guizot, and says his boss wants a deal. Guizot laughs him off and orders him out of the carriage. The thin man goes on as if he heard nothing, saying that about those 20,000 livres, Guizot will regret it if he doesn't listen. Guizot drawls that he has no idea what the man is talking about. The thin man asks why he bothers to hide it, since Similian went drinking at a brothel with their boss and let a great deal slip, including the task Guizot set him. Guizot mutters that Similian is useless trash, and tells them to take it up with him. The thin man says no, that Similian doesn't have the final word, and that the boss wants Guizot to pay the 20,000 straight to them. Guizot pretends to be amused, and calls it nonsense. The thin man reminds him that a wave of royal guards has flooded the St. Antoine district, and no one dares make trouble there now, and Guizot's face shifts as he asks what of it. The task Similian asked for is hard now, for them or the horse gang, the thin man allows, but the boss still means to earn that 20,000. Guizhou scoffs that they want money without doing the work. The thin man says it is nothing of the sort, that they will do one big thing, the kind worth 20,000, and stop the moment it is done. That catches Guizhou, who has been fretting over the guards sweeping his gangs, and he asks what they mean to do. The thin man corrects him that it is not what they plan but what Guizhou wants them to do. Guizhou drops the act and gives an ugly smile. If there were something to make the Saint Antoine police lose all face, he says he might consider handing the 20,000 straight across. It would have to be something every paper runs on the front page, something all Paris chews over for a year. The thin man thinks, then offers to slip into the Saint Antoine station, kill 10 policemen and burn the place down. Guizhou rubs his chin, the corner of his mouth curling, because a burn station means the crown prince loses face and the municipal commissioner is pleased, and he tells them to do it. Then the thin man says he wants to repeat the agreement, that Guizhou will pay 20,000 livres to hire them to kill 10 policemen and burn down the station. He asks whether that is right. The phrasing strikes Guizhou as odd, but the content is correct, so he decides the thug simply can't speak properly, and nods that yes, that is right. When the thin man asks whether anyone forced the decision on him, Guizhou says of course not. The thin man looks up and says he is honestly curious why a man would spend such a fortune on something with no benefit at all. Guizhou's face darkens, and he snaps that it is none of the fool's business, and orders him out to go do his job. The thin man agrees that it is truly time for business. He tucks the short blade away, pulls off the ragged hat, tears the false beard from his face, and draws a pair of cast-iron handcuffs. Waving them, he tells Guizhou he is suspected of conspiring to murder police officers, of burning down a station, and of threatening the safety of the crown prince. He is formally under arrest, in the name of the royal police. The royal police is only a polite name for the secret police, the century's version of a modern investigation bureau, with sweeping powers that reach as far as arresting a man on the spot. Guizhou's face goes rigid, and he tells Valien to control his man and demands to know what the fool is babbling about. The carriage lurches to a halt. Valien turns slightly, wearing a smile worse than tears, and only then does Guizhou see the dagger pressed to his own lower back. His pupils shrink and he lunges for the door handle, but the thin man is faster, and the instant Guizhou's weight leaves the seat, a hand clamps his neck and pins him to the backrest. He thrashes and shrieks that he is the chief of the Paris police, that there is no evidence, that they cannot arrest him. The man on Valien's right, silent until now, finally speaks, naming himself Ambroise de Herman, and saying he witnessed all of it on behalf of Her Majesty the Queen, and can prove the guilt. The carriage door opens from outside, and Alden and a constable level their guns, faces hard, saying they were driving and heard every word, and will all testify. Guizhou slumps in defeat. In the open yard of the Saint Antoine station, I watch my officers form up and pour past me at a run, and I nod to them while they answer with one hard synchronized shout. Alden cannot stop himself retelling the morning even though I have heard it once already. Antoine's men were waiting at the corner and took Guizhou straight to the royal police interrogation room. Alden went with another team to toss Guizhou's house, where he noticed a bulge at the head of the bed, broke it open, and found a hidden compartment. I smile and finish it for him, that then he found the notebook, and that he has done real service today. Guizhou's notebook holds everything: the major gangs of Saint Antoine, a long roll of criminals, and on the last pages the record of Guizhou shielding them and pocketing their dirty money. I throw the whole force in, my guard behind them, and hit the den straight off the notebook's leads. The district has one wild day of it. The criminals chase through the streets and pin down with man-catchers, a few who fight to the end taking bullets. The sweep runs 2 days, and the citizens stay home to give us room, some brave ones even standing at corners with clubs to help cut off runners. The cells fill fast and the overflow goes to the Bastille. A commotion that size pulls reporters from all over Paris. One of them matters more than the rest, though I only learn his name afterward. On White Iris Street, a middle-aged man stands frowning across the road, watching a squad of royal guard march 7 or 8 bound, bloodied men along. He has a wild mane of hair, deep lines carved beside his mouth, and the heavy look of a man forever chewing over the meaning of life. His name is Mara. The young man at his side frets that he really needn't come in person, that it looks dangerous here. But Mara waves it off, saying that without standing on the ground where a thing happened, a man can never know the truth. He ducks into a grocery, buys something at random, and points at the guards in the distance, asking the shopkeeper whether they are arresting political prisoners. The shopkeeper rolls his eyes and says crossly that those aren't political prisoners at all, but the Viper gang who never did a decent thing in their lives. He rolls up a sleeve to show a scar and says the Viper gang beat him last year. Before the Crown Prince brought the new police, he says they squeezed 5 livres out of him every month. Now, God bless the Crown Prince, the wretches are finally caught, and he will have money for a little butter for his children. Mara pulls out a notebook by habit and asks about this new police force. The shopkeeper sizes him up, pegs him for a reporter, and asks whether his thanks to the Crown Prince can go in the paper. Mara says they can. He works the street after that, stopping a passerby and getting an answer much like the first. Then he interviews 7 or 8 more people, visits the security post on White Iris Street, and questions the prisoners themselves. Slowly, he comes to believe the royal family has actually done something good for ordinary people, which strikes him as deeply strange. In his experience, the crown and the great nobles have only ever bled and bullied the people. Rooting out evil for them without charging a single fee is a first. But he is a man who respects facts. Once he has a pile of first-hand material, he goes back to his hotel and writes tomorrow's headline. It says the Crown Prince's police reform has shown remarkable results, tearing out the roots of crime in the Saint Antoine district in a single stroke. A hostile pen turned by nothing more than the plain truth. I will take it. Several gray-black carriages roll along the north bank of the Seine toward Versailles. In the middle, I cough and feel like I am riding a pile driver, shaken half to pieces. I rub my aching head and promise myself I will get spring suspension built soon, and tires if I can manage them. There are a great many carriage days ahead, and I refuse to be rattled into an early grave. The day before, the cabinet sent a letter of commendation for clearing the district's criminals in one sweep. It summoned me back to Versailles to report on my duties, signed and sealed by both the king and the queen. I shake my head to myself, because reporting on my duties after barely 20 days in office must be some kind of record. My guess is that Louis XVI and the Queen simply missed their son and found an excuse. It suits my own plans well enough. I never meant to sit in the police department forever, because my real goal has always been to save France's finances and keep the country from going bankrupt and the mob from taking my head. This crackdown is exactly the kind of result I can spend, walking into the palace to ask the Queen for the post of assistant to the Minister of Finance, then let the cabinet find a reason to object. For results this big in Saint Antoine, oddly enough, I have Guizot to thank. If he hadn't poured tens of thousands of livres into making chaos, I would never have launched a sweep that shook all of Paris. My eyes run over the pages in my hand, Guizot's confession and interrogation records from the secret police. From them I learned that reorganizing the force cut off the department's old trade in selling police posts, and that this is what set Guizot off. Under the pull of that 20,000 livres, his gangs killed a dozen citizens in a few days and hurt many more, and the whole district nearly slipped out of control. I breathe deep. If Semillian had understood the first thing about hiding a money trail, I would have been buried, and the police reform might have died halfway. A cold thread of fear stays with me. The bureaucracy, the nobility, the church, the capitalists, the foreign powers, any one careless step in remaking France brushes against someone's interests and brings the whole weight of them down on me. Schemes like Guizot's will keep surfacing, and against most of them I have almost no defense. So how do I climb out of a position this passive? I stare out the window, tapping the armrest, thinking, the way not to be stabbed in the back is to find the threat first, to hear of the plot before it moves. Better still, I want professionals who can strangle it in the cradle. For that, I would need a wide net of eyes and ears feeding me information, and a center to sift it, piece it together, and shape a response. From there, I could send people out to handle each problem on my word. Several names surface at once, the great spy services of the modern world, the ones every thriller back home was built on. With a professional apparatus like that in my hands, I wouldn't stand blind and deaf before the schemes of a dozen factions. My work of reforming France wouldn't keep getting cut off at the knees. France does already keep a secret service, the secret police, but I know those men are useless. They are fit for peeking at letters, listening at doors, and aimless watching, and they can't even manage that much cleanly. They are forever getting caught in the act, which is why the secret police carry such a foul name. Building my own team is the only reliable path, since I could train them with the ideas of a later age, and their loyalty would run deeper besides. But the secret police alone have already made all of France furious, and if I raise a second one, I become the target of every angry voice in the country overnight. I frown. How do I do this without drawing every eye, and where does the manpower even come from? In the end, I am still standing alone, short on political capital. It is hard. Thinking too long brings on a headache and a fit of coughing, and I smile at myself, bitter. This little body has always carried a weak chest, and the poor food and rough lodging in St. Antoine have flared the pneumonia again. It seems physical training will have to go on the list too. The carriage begins to slow, and I ask Emin whether we have arrived. He says probably not yet, then leans out the window and calls to ask what the matter is. A guard runs back from the lead carriage, a hand over his chest, and reports that the Minister of the Interior, Count Monod, happens to be passing and wishes to greet me in person. Happens to be passing. I look at Emin. He leans in and murmurs that it likely has to do with Guizot, and lays out the tie between the two men, and my interest sharpens. I was just fretting over my thin footing in the cabinet, and here comes political capital knocking on the carriage door. I tell the guard to invite Count Monod aboard. A moment later, a man in his 50s approaches. Narrow brown eyes, long waved hair, a powdered face. He hands his cane to a servant and bows deeply, saying he never expected to meet the Crown Prince on the road, and that it is true good fortune. I return the courtesy, wave him inside, and push the pastries across the little table, telling him they came from Her Majesty the Queen, and he should try one. Monod takes a piece as though I have done him a great honor, praises it to the skies. Then, as if it just occurred to him, signals a servant to bring in a wooden box. He says he has lately come by a fine blade that suits my heroic temper perfectly, and happens to have it with him to give me. I thank him. Once the box is in my hands, Monod eases into small talk about how much has happened in Paris of late. Indeed it has. Some officials' conduct is truly regrettable, he sighs. And he says Guizot used to be such an upright man, that who could have known? I open the box, cut him off with a smile, and tell him that if he has something to say, he should say it plainly. All sincerity now, he says he recommended Guizot purely for the man's decent ability, and had no idea what he was doing. Otherwise, he would surely have done everything to stop him. He thanks heaven the Crown Prince's superior wisdom saw through the scheme and stopped the disaster. Guizot had been his student, promoted to police chief by his own hand, so with a scandal this size he cannot easily wash himself clean. For all his power, Guizot sits in the hands of the secret police. Monod doesn't know the details and dares not ask the Queen straight out, so he has waited on the road to sound out the young Crown Prince. He asks what the charges against Guizot are this time. I keep my attention on the jewel-crusted scimitar, stroking it, and say offhand that I heard it is inciting a riot. Monod's body goes stiff, because a riot is a capital charge of subverting the crown, and if it holds, there is no way he escapes being dragged in. He manages a dry laugh, saying surely Guizot wouldn't have had such nerve. I ask whether that is so, and set the scimitar down and hand him the confession from the table. The royal police sent it over this morning, and Guizot directed a mob of thugs to storm the St. Antoine station, and as it happens, I was inside it at the time. Monod skims it and is instantly soaked in cold sweat, because even if he feels Guizot had no reason to start a riot, the evidence makes the charge easy to hang. He is so rattled he doesn't know what to do with his hands, cursing Guizot under his breath, then asking me with a miserable face whether there is any room to maneuver in this. I tell him some call it inciting a riot, but that I don't think it necessarily was, since I am the one who knows best what happened that day. Monod nods eagerly, begging me to explain the inside story to Her Majesty. I tell him we can talk about that in a few days, and pick the scimitar back up to swing it once or twice. I add that I have been busy lately, making ready to prove to my mother that I am fit to serve as assistant to the Minister of Finance. The turn throws him for a second, then he remembers I proposed exactly that at the cabinet meeting. He hurries to say no, one could suit the post better, and that at the cabinet meeting the day after tomorrow he will put my name forward. He can also go talk Archbishop Brienne into backing me. Brienne is the sitting Minister of Finance and Chief Minister both, the most important man under the crown. Working with clever people really is easy. I smile and nod and say Guizot must have hired an assassin and sheltered criminals, and that I will lay it all out plainly for Her Majesty. Monod snaps a hand to his chest and calls me the very voice of justice, swearing he will always be loyal to their majesties and to me. I tell him I value his loyalty, and that I like his scimitar very much. A great stone lifts off his heart, and after a few more pleasantries he takes his leave. Then I remember something. The Minister of the Interior runs the nation's municipal affairs and oversees the police, which makes Monod the man who chooses the next Lieutenant General of Police in Paris. My own attention will be swallowed by finance from here on, so the police reform needs a dependable man to keep pushing it, and the shell of the police department could give perfect cover to the intelligence service I have been turning over in my mind. So I raise a hand to hold Monod a moment and ask who will succeed as Lieutenant General of Police in Paris. He remembers my reform on the spot and says, without hesitation, that of course it will rest on my opinion. Satisfied, I tell him I will do my best to offer suggestions, and that I am entirely convinced Guizhou's crimes have nothing to do with him, so he should travel safely. Monod bows, steps back 3 paces, and turns to go. Some 10 paces on, he finally lets out a long breath. He no longer dares treat the crown prince as a gullible boy. In the carriage, I held the reins of the whole conversation, calm and unhurried, giving him the very feeling he once had facing Louis XV. He tells his driver to turn for Versailles. He mutters to himself that the child of divine favor lives up to the name, and that he will have to keep his distance from the Duke of Orleans from now on. I set off again, and after an hour or so, a trombone sings out ahead, over the brisk beat of military drums. Emin tells me quietly that we have arrived. The carriage stops, and 2 nobles I don't know step up, one opening the door and bowing, the other setting a wooden stepladder at the threshold, welcoming the crown prince home. I climb down, nod to them, and look out to see 100 honor guards at least drawn up on both sides in crisp uniform, swords raised to the sky. In the marble court before the great entrance of Versailles, hundreds of nobles crowd the steps, staring toward me, and when they see me, the cheer that goes up drowns the band out entirely. I ask what all this is for. The 2 nobles say quickly that their majesties have come out to welcome me in person. I press a hand to my forehead. You would think I had come home in triumph from a war against a foreign kingdom. It isn't really a surprise, though. Since Louis XVI took the throne, he has buried himself in his locks and done nothing that earned him any glory. The queen, a woman of ordinary ability, can barely keep the court running, with rumors of her spending everywhere. So the family's prestige has thinned by the day. Then their son makes a thunderclap of a debut, throwing the Lieutenant General of Police of Paris into a cell and clearing nearly every criminal out of the Saint-Antoine district. Now he is the one thing all Paris talks about. With a sun shining like that, of course the king and queen would trumpet it. So here is a welcome without precedent, with a crowd of nobles who didn't rate a place in the marble court, still waiting eagerly inside. I walk between the honor guards and look up to see an elegant, beautiful woman at the top of the steps. She wears a wide-skirted gown of purple silk, a pure white ermine shawl, and 2 long feathers set in her piled hair. Queen Marie. Half hidden behind her stands a plump, pale man in a blue velvet coat, worked with fine silver thread, a black tricorn, and black calfskin heels. His nervous face gives him away as the King of France, the famous locksmith and shut-in Louis XVI. I quicken my step toward the 2 of them, while the nobles on either side bow their heads in turn. The whole entrance looks like a great tide of color rolling slowly up the stairs. Just as Queen Marie smiles and starts to open her arms for me, a young noblewoman on my right in a low-shouldered gown seems to freeze, tilts pale and boneless, and pitches forward. I catch her on instinct and ask if she is all right, but she keeps her eyes shut and burrows her cold body into my arms. The young ladies all around light up with fury, grinding their teeth over the trick that Alyssa just used to press herself against the crown prince. The previous crown prince was a dull thing, half useless, and for all his rank the noble girls thought little of him. But by now the stories have spread through the girls of Versailles and grown more legendary with every telling. There is the knowledge that stunned Lagrange, the 2-day annihilation of the Saint-Antoine criminals, the murder solved in 3 minutes. Talking about the crown prince and trading news of him has become the fashion, until 2.5 of every 3 sentences the girls speak are about me. The child of divine favor has become the dream lover of them all, and even the ones who know a marriage is impossible would gladly settle for being a mistress. A tall girl on the left decides she can play this game too. She drops her fan at her feet, gives a soft cry that her dress is laced too tight to breathe, and lists over toward me, so I catch her with my left hand. The air goes thick with jealousy. Soft cries of how cold it is and how suddenly dizzy break out on every side, as more than a dozen perfume-swaying girls tip toward me at once. While I am standing there at a total loss, Quesad steps in, scoops up the 2 in my arms, 1 under each hand, and bellows at his guards to help the ladies up at once. The moment the fainting girls squint and see burly guardsmen rushing over, they escape gravity's pull, snap upright, and stand there as dignified as you please. Not one of them looked cold a second ago. Puberty is going to be exhausting. Once I have made my bows, Queen Marie pulls me into a fierce embrace. She tells me she has thought of nothing but me day and night, asks if I am hurt, and exclaims over how thin I have grown. She declares that from now on I will take a chef with me every time I leave. Louis XVI comes up from the side, but with the crowd pressing in, he can't find a single word, and only gives me an encouraging look. The queen tells me to come inside quickly, out of the cold, and leads me into the palace. Then she glances back at the flock of socialites and whispers in my ear that I have reached the age to be engaged. She asks which country's princess I favor. A Spanish one, perhaps? Or a Savoyard? I don't know whether to laugh or cry. What engagement? This small body has only just stumbled into puberty, and they really oughtn't put me through it. I turn to Louis XVI to change the subject, asking after his salamander fountain. He glances at the people around us and answers something else entirely, telling me to choose a girl I like, and that even if she is no princess, he will support me. The queen gives him a helpless look, then takes my hand and says she has also arranged a grand ball for me. She stops short and asks why my hand is so hot, then feels my forehead and cries out that I have a fever. She wheels around to shout for her lady-in-waiting, Debignac, to fetch Dr. Lamarck at once. The woman says Dr. Lamarck went to Paris this morning. The queen tells her to fetch Dr. Lasern instead, and quickly, she kisses my burning forehead, her eyes brimming, telling me that from now on, I will take a doctor everywhere I go. Warmth spreads through me, and I hurry to soothe her that it is only a slight fever and nothing at all, then promptly ruin it with a fit of coughing. She scolds that it is nothing of the sort, that I am gravely ill, and tells me to go and rest and let the doctor see me properly. When the girls nearby hear the crown prince is ill, they crowd in all concern and nearly carry me to my bedchamber alongside the queen. Once I am laid on the velvet-covered bed, the queen throws Louis XVI another reproachful look. It seems to say that if he had even half the Sun King's ability, their son wouldn't be worn to the bone toiling for the nation. Before long, a short, middle-aged doctor comes in panting, takes my temperature under the queen's prodding, and examines me. He bows to the king and queen to report that the crown prince's pneumonia has worsened, that the fever is 39 degrees, and that he must perform bloodletting at once. The queen tells him to be quick about it. My face goes dark. Bloodletting. With a frame as small as this, are they trying to help me kick the bucket faster? I don't blame the doctor for it, mind you. Medicine in this era is barely more than barbers dabbling at alchemy, and bloodletting is the standard cure. Only a few years from now, an American president named Washington will be bled to death by his own physicians. I put on a show of discomfort and a need for quiet, and clear the visiting nobles and my parents out of the room. The moment the door shuts, I scramble off the bed and tell Dr. Lasern there will be no bloodletting, that however sick I get in the future, he is never to bleed me. He protests that it will not do. I argue with him again and again. When he won't bend, I draw the Persian scimitar Minode gave me from the table and tell him in a low voice that I won't say it twice, that there will be no bloodletting. I ask whether he understands. The blade throws off a cold light. Lasern's pupils shrink as he remembers the crown prince's fearsome reputation. This is the man who chased the lieutenant general of police across half of Paris to arrest him with his own hands, who led 90 guards against hundreds of gangsters and wiped them out. That is the shape the story has taken after passing through so many mouths. Lasern swallows hard and nods that he will do as I command, then adds, carefully, that I still have a fever. I feel dizzy and drained. Penicillin, the true hammer against pneumonia, would be a wonderful thing to have, except it isn't something you just whip up. Is there any fever breaker I could make quickly instead? Then I remember a documentary I once watched about aspirin, which walked through how to extract salicin, the early ancestor of the drug. My memory is good, and I still have the main steps. Salicin's anti-inflammatory action is slight, but it breaks a fever beautifully. And best of all, it is simple to make. Half a day's work. I ask Lasern whether he knows drug refinement, and he answers with confidence that he does, that he even taught the subject at the university. Good. I take up paper and pen, write out the process for salicin, and walk him through it in detail. Crush and steam dry willow bark, add a touch of quicklime, then steep it in alcohol under alkaline conditions for an hour and a half. Boil it, filter it, evaporate, and concentrate it. Adjust the extract back to alkaline, then steep and repeat until the crystals drop out. I tell him that is roughly the whole of it, and ask how long he thinks it will take. Lasern's eyes go wide, because the command I show of the work is no less than his own, and the child of divine favor truly earns the name. We go over the process together until nothing is missed. Then he judges that everything needed is in the Royal Alchemy Laboratory, and that if all goes well, it can be done before 4 in the afternoon. He ventures that he has never heard of this medicine and wonders whether it is safe. I tell him I am certain of it, that he should go and make it, and not tell my parents I wasn't bled. Lasern agrees. Between the effort and the fever, I fall into a deep sleep. Some unknown while later, I feel a smooth hand on my forehead through the haze. I struggle my eyes open to find pale green eyes as clear as lake water, and an elegantly curved nose above me. I shrink back a little and see it as a girl of 17 or 18. She has smeared something brownish on her lips, wears a heavy white wig, and is dressed in men's dark green hunting clothes and black breeches, like a mischievous child who raided her father's wardrobe. She bows and apologizes for waking me, then turns and reports to a Dr. Lamarck that the princess fever is very high. A middle-aged man comes over and asks her, calling her Perna, to help him take the princess' temperature, and she agrees. He has tufted hair, a plain light gray coat, a thin face with a high bridge to his nose, and the same pale green eyes. Lamarck bows to me, then pushes up both my sleeves to check them, frowns, and says that Lucerne told him he had already bled me, though plainly that wasn't the truth. I sit up, terribly dizzy, and Perna steadies me with one hand and tells me softly to open my mouth and, whatever I do, not to bite down. I open it groggily, and a thick glass thermometer goes in. 10 minutes later, Perna draws it out and looks to Lamarck in concern, reading it at 39.6 degrees. Lamarck takes a knife and a copper basin from his leather case and tells Perna to prepare to bleed the crown prince. I tell him flatly there will be no bloodletting, that I strictly forbid him to bleed me. He answers gravely that he must, that a fever left too long leads to serious consequences. I struggle toward my scimitar, and Lamarck adds that if I refuse treatment, he will report the matter straight to Her Majesty the Queen. My head aches. Just as I am working out how to bring this hardliner around, Lucerne pushes the door open carrying a glass bottle. He hands it over, looking guilty, saying it is what I asked for and murmuring that the purification came out a little insufficient perhaps. I look at the gray, sludgy stuff inside, uncapped, and get a noseful of alcohol, and I smile to myself, because this is rather more than a little insufficient. Still, I comfort him that for a first attempt it is already very good, and thank him sincerely. I am about to down the salicin when a thought stops me, and I ask Lamarck how long the fever would take to break under his bloodletting. He says after a moment that it might break by tonight, or perhaps by tomorrow morning. I hold the bottle up and tell him that with the medicine I have made, the fever breaks in an hour. Lamarck feels his professional dignity pricked and shakes his head at once, insisting my pneumonia is not under control and that among all the medicines he knows, none can break a fever so fast. And he has the standing to say it. Lamarck sits in the French Academy of Sciences, a celebrated European biologist and pharmacologist. The man who first put forward the ideas of biological evolution and natural selection, and the foremost physician in France. So I offer him a wager with a tired smile that if my fever breaks within the hour, he is never to bleed me again. Lamarck blinks, then nods with confidence, on the condition that if my medicine falls short, I may never again refuse a doctor's treatment. I take the wager. I pour out a spoonful of salicin and swallow it, and the bitterness and the reek of alcohol nearly make me gag. Lamarck draws out his pocket watch and shows it to me, marking the time at 21 minutes past 4. I nod. I would have liked to sleep more, but with 3 people standing over the bed, one of them a girl, it is too awkward. So I get up and fall to discussing the purification of salicin with Lucerne. Hearing that the drug comes from willow bark, Lamarck shakes his head inwardly. The British studied willow bark's effects more than a decade ago, and while it does bring a fever down, it takes several days running to work. It is brutal on the stomach. So many give it up to the stomach pain before the fever ever breaks. Yet he is deeply impressed by the Crown Prince's grasp of the theory, far beyond his own students. He thinks that if the boy gave himself to pharmacology or experimental science, he would surely do great things. In truth, I am a rank amateur here, with nothing but a little that rubbed off from a chemistry major roommate back at university. Yet in the 18th century, I come off as a consummate professional. I am partway through explaining how the cooling and precipitation could be sped up when I stop, rub my forehead, and tell Lamarck with a smile that I believe my fever has already broken. He had been listening so closely to the talk of the experiment that he had nearly forgotten the bet. He checks his watch to find it 58 minutes past 4, only 37 minutes since I took the dose. He looks hard at me, catches the spark back in my eyes, leans in and lays a hand on my forehead and finds it truly no longer hot, and he calls for the thermometer. He sets it under my tongue, waits a while, draws it out to read himself, and his eyes fill with disbelief at 36.8 degrees, a body gone back to dead normal. He mutters that it cannot be possible, then grabs my shoulders in sudden excitement and asks whether what I drank was really only willow bark extract. I smile and nod. He says he never dreamed the effect could be this good once purified, his eyes all but sparkling. If the potency holds, he says, this is nothing short of an epoch-making medicine, and he asks whether he might try to manufacture it. I tell him, of course. and send him to Lucerne for the details. He bows to me deeply, swearing he cannot put his gratitude into words, then flusters off to dig out a notebook and find Lucerne, turning back once to ask whether I invented the medicine. I pause, then can only say offhand that it must have been a flash of inspiration, a revelation from God. Lamarck is thunderstruck, half wondering whether the Crown Prince really is a child of divine favor, to conjure such a potion out of a single flash. Still, the rigor of a scientist tells him it needs a great deal of testing before the effect is truly proven, and the thought fills him with fighting spirit. He grabs Lucerne and heads for the alchemy laboratory, leaving Perna an instruction to watch His Highness closely at all times, and fetch him the moment anything changes. She promises she will. 2 days later, with the salicin, my condition has settled a great deal, and though a bit of a cough lingers, the fever hasn't come back. When I come through the golden doors of the meeting hall in the east wing of Versailles, it isn't yet 9, a few minutes short of the cabinet meeting. The other ministers are already there and rise to bow as I enter. Mono comes over wreathed in smiles and whispers his thanks, telling me the decree on Guizot's disposal was issued yesterday, and made no mention of inciting a riot. I smile and lead him to his seat. At lunch the day before I had dropped a few words to the Queen, laying the whole business squarely on Guizot alone. Then I had the secretary add a formal report, and the thing was considered closed. I still suspect there is more under the Guizot affair, though it likely has nothing to do with Monod. And once my intelligence service exists, it will be the first thing I look into. Monod stands, throws his arms wide, and announces to the room that the police reforms under the Crown Prince have brought remarkable results. The criminals of Saint Antoine are all but wiped out, he cries, and His Highness truly earns the name child of divine favor, so everyone should congratulate him. At that, whatever they are actually thinking, the ministers rise one after another to congratulate me, the flattery pouring out without a break. I am returning the courtesies when the golden doors swing open, and the Master of Ceremonies calls out that His Majesty the King and Her Majesty the Queen have arrived. The ministers are a little startled to see the King, who rarely comes to cabinet, and they turn to Louis XVI and Queen Marie, and bow with hands over their chests. The King knows the ministers well, so his shyness sits lighter on him, and he smiles and says they are as hardworking as ever, then asks whether someone can tell him what they were discussing. Monod says at once, beaming, that they were voicing their respect for the brilliant results the Crown Prince achieved in the police reforms. The King and Queen take the head of the table, joy plain on both their faces, and Queen Marie runs tirelessly back through my recent feats one more time. Judging the mood just right, Monod throws me a meaningful look, clears his throat, and stands. He says that during his time at the police department, the Crown Prince has fully shown his extraordinary talent. He recalls Her Majesty saying that if His Highness did well at City Hall, he would be made assistant to the Minister of Finance. The Queen nods, smiling. Beside them, the Minister of Justice, Sommiar, frowns and cuts a sideways glance at the Duke of Orleans. Seeing the Duke unmoved, he pretends to lower his head and mutters that His Majesty only said the Crown Prince would be allowed contact with financial affairs. His voice is pitched just loud enough for those around him to catch. The smile fades from Queen Marie's face. Her gaze travels the table and settles on the Minister of Finance, Archbishop Brienne, as she asks his opinion. Monod gives me a look that says not to worry, that he has already squared it with Brienne. The round-faced old man in the second seat rises, bows, and says without hesitation that the Crown Prince is fully capable of serving as assistant to the Minister of Finance. He is the Archbishop of Toulouse, Chief Minister of the Cabinet, and Minister of Finance both, and once even he has nodded no. One else has grounds to object. The smile returns to the Queen's face, and she is about to make the appointment when Brienne adds that the financial questions of the moment are grave, and the Crown Prince lacks experience. So he asks to keep final say over fiscal policy, that the Crown Prince not go around him in money matters. He hopes Her Majesty will grant it. I smile bitterly to myself. How terrified are you that I will wreck the national finances? Right now, other than me, who in this room can save your treasury? Just as I am turning over how to bring the old man around, the Duke of Orleans stands and says there are a great many matters in national finance. In the past, he says the minor ones were handled by the assistant to the Minister of Finance. If Brienne oversaw every one of them himself, it would drain him badly, so he ought to spend his strength driving the new tax bill through rather than being pulled apart by trifles. The hall goes silent. Everyone is startled, because only at the last cabinet meeting the Duke of Orleans and the Crown Prince were at each other's throats, nearly to blows. So why is he speaking up for me now? Queen Marie asks Brienne warily what duties the assistant to the Minister of Finance actually handles. He says mainly loans and the repayment of national debt, and the drafting of certain clauses in the tax bills. The Queen's brow smooths, because these are simple things. Loans follow the old traditions with the banks, and the drafting is left to clerks and lawyers, all well within my reach, and a fine way to learn the ground. She hesitates no longer, and after briefly consulting Louis XVI, she announces loudly her decision. The matters previously handled by the assistant to the Minister of Finance shall now be handled by the Crown Prince with full authority, while everything else must have Archbishop Brienne's agreement. She formally names me assistant to the Minister of Finance and asks the Count of Barenton to prepare the appointment papers, which he assents to. I bow and accept, say the polite words, and watch the Duke of Orleans out of the corner of my eye, wondering what he is playing at. On the surface, he looks untroubled, but behind that face he is sneering in triumph. He knows that with my momentum he cannot keep me from the post, so days ago he began digging me a pit instead. Next month, 6 million livres of national debt come due, and he has already reached an understanding with the banking houses to suspend every loan to the government. He has even composed the headline in his head that the Crown Prince's mismanagement has driven the government to default and touched off a financial crisis. The Queen gives her son a few words of encouragement, then turns to Brienne to open the day's agenda. He pulls out his prepared papers, settles his gold-rimmed glasses on his nose, and says that given this year's fiscal state, the budget for the coming half year must be cut again. He looks to the Queen, who nods that she has read his report and agrees. She declares on the royal family's behalf that its yearly spending will be reduced by 1 million livres to ease the pressure. Brienne thanks Her Majesty for her benevolence, then turns to a long-faced, big-nosed man on the right of the table. He proposes the Navy build 1 fewer battleship and 2 fewer second-rate ships, saving the Treasury 1,350,000 livres. The Navy Minister, the Marquis de Castries, springs out of his chair. He protests that the British fleet already dwarfs theirs, and that they need 4 more battleships beyond the plan just to hold their trade lines. Now, far from adding funds, Brienne wants to cut 1 and 2 second-rate ships besides. The Queen signals him to calm himself and asks the room for opinions. The great majority back the cuts, because the budget is only so large, and if they don't cut the Navy, their own territories go under the knife instead, so better the Navy than themselves. Castries sweats, and finding no one to lean on, his eyes fall on me. He has heard I lately led my guards against the gangs of Saint Antoine, so he takes me for a hot-blooded hardliner who will back a bigger military. He asks whether I too agree with Brienne's cuts, which would only leave France weaker before the British. I refuse firmly, telling him that cutting even a single battleship is a mistake. Castries begins to agree, and gets no further, because the back half of my sentence stops him cold. I believe every one of the Navy's current battleship construction plans should be shelved entirely. Castries goes pale, staring, and cries out that I cannot say such a thing, that the fleet is the sharpest spear of France, and absolutely cannot be touched. I look at him calmly and ask how many warships the British can build in the time it takes us to build one. He says, unsure, that it is about 1.5. Seeing me smile and hold my tongue, he adds with some irritation that it is 2, that the British launch new ships terribly fast, perhaps even more than 2. I nod. In other words, no matter how furiously we build, we can never beat the British Navy. I have said aloud the truth everyone in the room knows, and no one dared speak, and it falls dead silent. If that is so, I go on. Why pour vast resources into building ships, when for escorting merchant vessels the fleet we already have is enough? I know perfectly well how much the fleet matters, and I would never oppose growing the Navy. What I oppose is squandering more money on great, useless, old-fashioned sailing warships. Britain holds an enormous edge in shipbuilding, with its many yards, its skilled hands, and its deep funds. As an island walled off by the sea, it can pour army resources into its navy while France cannot. In a pure contest of numbers, France is certain to lose. The Battle of Trafalgar a decade or so from now will prove it. France throws everything into building warships, joins with the Spanish and Dutch fleets, and is still ground into the seabed by the British Navy. After that rout, Britain seals off France's sea lanes completely. Napoleon slides into decline, and Britain becomes the empire on which the sun never sets. So there is only one road out. I would abandon the fashionable multi-deck sailing ships and leap straight to ironclads, using the advanced knowledge in my head. Driven by steam engines and armed with far heavier guns, they would deal the British warships a blow from another dimension. But none of that can be spoken in this meeting, since a man like Orleans would very likely leak it. Castries knows I am using sophistry, yet for the moment cannot find the words to knock it down, and only frets that the queen might truly scrap all the new ships. Brienne shoots me an appreciative look, thinking this young man knows how to haggle. He has barely taken office and already lends a hand to the reduction plan, and might make a good assistant after all. He clears his throat and says pretentiously that though the finances are tight, naval development cannot be abandoned, and cutting one ship of the line is already the limit. Manad chimes in that the overseas colonies need warships watching over them, or the mobs out there make trouble every few days. At last, Queen Marie decides. She tells me not to cut spending too radically. Then she tells the Marquis de Castries that for now they will follow Archbishop Brienne's plan and cut one ship of the line and 2 second-rate ships. She hopes, though, that he will audit the other new ships carefully and root out the waste. With his new ships all but gutted, Castries feels like a man who survived a disaster and nods weakly. He sighs inwardly that the Crown Prince is still too young to grasp what the Navy means to the nation, and that I care only about cutting costs. He will have to work on me in future, he thinks, to change my view. Having handled the most difficult of them, Brienne feels much lighter and reads on through the reductions. He says everyone has heard about the Netherlands, where the Patriot Party held out less than a month before the Prussians routed it. In light of that, he says, they can end the aid to the Dutch Patriot Party and save the treasury 250,000 livres a month. I frown slightly, calling up what I know of the Dutch Patriot movement. It was a rising of the new Dutch capitalists and citizens against William V, and with French money they drove the stadtholder William V out and set up the States General. Later, under the scheming of his wife, the Prussian Princess Wilhelmina, Prussia stepped in with troops. The Patriot Party collapsed, William V was restored, and every livre France had sunk in went down the drain. The ministers all agree to cut the Dutch rebels loose, since 20,000 Prussian regulars have already marched in, and the Patriot Party's thin forces are no match. So better to stop the bleeding now. The Queen asks whether there are any other opinions. I say that I believe there are, and stand. The war minister, Saint Priest, had meant to put up a little fight, given how much has already gone into the Netherlands. But the sight of the Crown Prince rising sinks his heart. After my try at scrapping every new warship, he is sure I am of the anti-war party. And with the Queen doting on me, the Dutch aid is surely doomed. I say loudly that not only should we not cut the aid to the Patriot Party, we should increase it, and even take the posture of moving troops against Prussia. We absolutely cannot let the Patriot Party fall. The Queen is very surprised and asks for my reasons. First, the Netherlands is the mouth of the Rhine shipping lane, and holding it lets us form a real check on Prussia. Second, the Netherlands has a thriving commerce, and drawing it into our sphere lets us earn the aid back through trade alone. Last, a war between us and Prussia is inevitable in time, and the Netherlands can tie down a great many Prussian troops from the west. But if we let Prussia take the Netherlands, all of that becomes an asset in Prussian hands. There are 2 more reasons I keep to myself. The Netherlands sits on large reserves of coal and iron. Now that the starting gun of the Industrial Revolution is fired, whoever holds the most coal and iron in the years ahead holds the advantage. And the Patriot Party has a real gift for stirring up trouble. So once Prussia drives them out, they will come flooding into France. In the history I know, they caused no small amount of it there during the Great Revolution. As I finish, the ministers' faces turn a little strange, because what I have said makes plenty of sense. And yet I fight hard against building warships on one hand while backing aid to the Dutch on the other. That phrase in particular, a war with Prussia is inevitable, makes them wonder, and they all lower their heads, trying not to follow the thought to its worst end. Brienne speaks first, telling me our finances simply cannot spare the Dutch any more money. I answer that we just saved a sum by not building warships, so we should put some of it toward them. Navy Minister Castries nearly weeps, thanking me from the bottom of his heart, while the War Minister, on the other hand, weeps for joy and thanks me just as fervently. Brienne, meanwhile, starts to feel glad all over again that the fiscal decision still rests in his hands. Queen Marie throws him a line, telling me my reasons are more than sound. Only, she fears that even with more aid, the Patriot Party still will not be able to hold back the Prussian army. The whole battle turned on Wilhelmina. I had chewed on that for a while, and I laid it out for the cabinet plainly. If the Patriot Party could hold out a little longer, if we used Wilhelmina well and moved some troops up to the French-Prussian border, Prussia would think twice and pull its forces back. I told them I would put the full plan into an official document for the Marquis de Saint Priest. The Queen nodded and said she would let the War Minister's opinion decide whether we kept funding the aid. Then my father spoke, which almost never happened in these rooms. Louis XVI, who had been sitting there like a piece of the furniture, announced there was no need to touch the treasury at all. He would personally hand over 600,000 livres to support the Patriot Party. He gave me an approving little smile after he said it. I could have kissed the old man. Brienne exhaled like a drowning man reaching air and bowed to my father, thanking His Majesty for such generosity. He said the Treasury could suspend its own funding for now, and we could revisit the aid in 2 months depending on how the Netherlands looked. He turned to my mother and asked whether she found that acceptable. She nodded, said it was fine, and moved us to the next item. Brienne kept shooting me nervous glances after that, plainly terrified I would meddle again. I let him sweat and stayed quiet, so the rest of his budget cuts passed smoothly, and the cabinet drifted through the usual miscellaneous business before it wrapped up. The Queen signed the last 2 documents without looking up and asked Brienne about the tax bill, which she'd heard was going badly. She meant the reform the government had been pushing since the start of the year. It would make the privileged nobility pay land taxes like ordinary commoners, allow grain to move and trade freely, abolish forced corvée labor, and raise the stamp duties. The whole point was to lift revenue and close the Treasury's bleeding deficit. And if it ever passed, it would genuinely help the common people. But the high nobility had lined up against it as one body. It had been dead in the water for over 6 months, and the last finance minister had already been thrown out over it. Brienne answered with a sour face that the High Court was stalling the new bill, and word was they meant to reject it outright. Under French law, the reform had to be registered with the High Court and then signed by the king before it could take effect. The trouble was that the court sat firmly in the nobility's pocket, so a bill that bit into noble interests simply died at registration and never breathed. The Queen's voice went tired as she told Brienne he knew our finances, and the bill had to pass as soon as humanly possible. He swore he would do his utmost. I shook my head where no one could see it. I knew exactly how this went, because I had read the history. Brienne would never get the bill through. In the end, my father, desperate for any way out, would take some hardliners' advice. He would strip the High Court of its powers, exile the stubborn judges, replace them with a royal-controlled plenary court, and ram the bill through by force. And the moment he did, the high nobility would seize on it and paint Louis XVI as a lawless tyrant. They would set off a tax resistance movement that rolled across the whole country until the national finances collapsed into chaos. With no voice in public life, my father would be unable to defend himself. He would have to recall the exiled judges, restore the High Court, and watch it kill his freshly passed reform on the spot. The worst part was what it taught the nobles, that the king could not beat them, which only made them more arrogant and grasping afterward. Cornered, he would convene the Estates General, hoping the commoners would back him against the aristocracy, and the nobles would twist that assembly into riots. Then the Great Famine of 1788 would arrive, nobody having planned for it, and the whole situation would spiral straight into revolution. I looked at Brienne and thought that asking nobles to accept a bill making them pay more was like asking a tiger to hand over its own skin. To make tax reform stick, you had to hit these nobles hard first, until they understood exactly what royal power was. Only then would they pay up like good little subjects. And you had to seize public opinion with both hands, because these men were experts at twisting the truth, whipping up the crowds and turning chaos into profit. Only when the French people could actually hear the government and know the facts would they stop being played like instruments. I took a slow breath. Becoming assistant to the Minister of Finance had been my first step, but rewriting history meant grinding through obstacle after obstacle. I would not be gentle with anyone, noble or churchman or capitalist, who stood in my road. The Queen's voice cut my scheming short as she adjourned the meeting. I rose with the ministers, bowed to my parents, and turned to leave, but she called me back before I reached the door. Once the hall had emptied, my mother smiled and told me I had done splendid work with the police reform, that the Saint Antoine district had plainly become the safest patch of ground in Paris. Then she paused, sighed, and said the reform would have to be shut down. I asked why. She explained gently that after my changes, the police salaries had climbed too high, and the whole burden now fell on the city. I had been paying the officers out of my own pocket before, but City Hall simply could not carry the cost, so ordinary citizens would have to go back to relying on the civilian patrols. I told her without a beat of hesitation that public security mattered too much for that. It should not just survive but spread across all of Paris and eventually the entire country. As for the money, I said, she needn't worry, because with me taking over the finances, or rather participating in the financial management, the treasury would be full soon enough. I caught the slip and coughed over it. She looked at me with amusement and asked where exactly I planned to find the money. I paused, running through the answers I could not give her. There were the steam engines and blast furnace steel and rubber and mining and cement and armaments, any one of which could pull in tens of millions of livres. But I couldn't breathe a word of that. So I picked the harmless one she could swallow, finance and real estate, and luxury goods, and told her that in short, I was confident. She frowned, clearly finding it flimsy, then offered me a deal. She would give me 6 months, and if I solved the police salaries, the reform continued. Otherwise, everything went back exactly as it was. I said fine, and told her I doubted it would even take that long. Beside us, my father checked the time and reminded us that no amount of work should ever come between a man and his lunch. He steered us both toward the royal dining room. In the corridor, I remembered something and asked my mother whether there was a good candidate for Paris police commissioner. She said I'd have to ask Count Monod about that. I told her he would accept my recommendation. She caught the meaning fast and asked whether I was blackmailing him with the Guizot matter. I told her entirely straight-faced that I was doing no such thing, and that I was merely helping him feel at ease. Blackmail was such an ugly word for such a useful tool. My mother sized me up, clearly curious, and laughed that it was no wonder Monod had proposed making me assistant to the Minister of Finance that very day. She asked how on earth I had persuaded him. I only smiled and said nothing, and she let it drop. After a moment, she gave me 2 names. Besançon had served as a trade coordinator across several provinces and led the mounted police to wipe out smugglers, a man solid at coordination and management. Friant had been a company commander in the Flanders Brigade, and once her own bodyguard, now running infantry recruitment, excellent at training and drafting regulations. She said she could vouch for both men's loyalty, and which of them I used was up to me. I nodded and said I'd meet them before deciding. I didn't know either man from a stranger on the street, but a newcomer to politics with no team of his own takes whatever help the Queen offers. Then it struck me. If I controlled the police system, I could build a police academy and pull students from the common people. First, it would train professional officers and thin out the nobility's grip on policing. Second, I could teach management, trade, journalism, and law, screen the sharpest talent, and grow my own inner circle. For a second, I let myself picture it. A whole generation of senior officials one day bowing and calling me headmaster. History had already proven how well a loyal academy could build an officer corps. Men who owed everything to the one at its head. A door creaked ahead. I looked up and we'd reached the dining room, already packed with nobles who'd come to watch us eat. Ever since Louis XV, every activity of the French royal family, eating, sleeping, amusement, even childbirth, could be gawked at by anyone who wandered in. I felt a headache building as the Queen towed me to the vast gilded table. The master of ceremonies struck his staff hard on the floor as horns rang out, and the ritual began. Every dish demanded music and passed through a dozen hands, and a parade of fussy maneuvers before anyone was allowed to actually eat it. I leaned in and whispered to my mother that if the Navy minister came to her about cutting the shipbuilding plan, she should just send him to me and I'd handle him. She looked genuinely surprised and a little relieved, because Castries was a stubborn zealot, and slashing his budget would have earned her a month of pestering. She nodded, happy to have a son who could carry some of her load at last. Meanwhile, on the west stairs of Versailles, the Minister of Justice asked the Duke of Orleans whether the Crown Prince's performance meant he leaned toward Britain. My cousin narrowed his eyes and muttered that it was probably the foreign queen's idea, and that if downsizing the fleet shifted British policy toward France, it would be very bad for their side. 2 leagues off, in an open square, Count Monod walked in the sun beside Nicouet, the Minister of Civil Registration. Monod, who held the interior, offered that the Crown Prince at least seemed staunchly anti-Prussian. Nicouet sighed that being anti-Prussian and anti-British made a man a hardliner. Being neither made him anti-war, and the real nightmare was a prince who was anti-Prussian, but pro-British. He said bluntly that if France ever produced a monarch like Peter III, it would be an unmitigated disaster. He meant the old Tsar of Imperial Russia, who had worshipped Frederick II of Prussia since boyhood. That Tsar had forced his own army to retreat and signed away every Russian advantage in a treaty grotesquely favorable to Prussia. After the day's cabinet meeting, everyone was fretting that the Crown Prince was some starry-eyed admirer of Britain. Monod shook his head slightly and said he'd dealt with His Highness, and that the boy had great wisdom. Pushing to cut warships, he insisted, was almost certainly about their ruinous cost, not any wish to flatter the British. He said he hoped so, at least. The gist of the meeting reached the office of the British ambassador soon enough. Ambassador Harriet sat in silence for a full 3 minutes after hearing that the French Crown Prince wanted all warship construction halted and a hard line taken against Prussia. Then he summoned a confidant, gave careful instructions, and once the man had gone, wrote up a solemn report and sent it home to Britain. A lunch where even the order of your bites was regulated finally ended. My father hauled me off to his workshop to admire his latest masterpiece, pressed a handmade brass safe into my arms, and only then set me loose. The man could make a lock that would stump a museum and could not save a single livre if his throne depended on it. By the time I got back to my quarters, Dr. Lamarck was already there, asking Perna about my recent health. I had my own personal physician now, yet Perna still insisted on coming every single day to check on me. Lamarck hurried up and bowed, saying he'd heard my condition was under control, which heartened him, and that it must be the miraculous salicin. I returned the greeting and gave the credit to Dr. Perna's care as well. Perna, standing off to the side, murmured in a voice thin as a mosquito that she hadn't earned her medical license yet. Lamarck praised his assistant, insisting her skills beat most licensed doctors, then produced a small glass bottle and looked at me eagerly. He said he and Mr. Larceny had made several batches of salicin, now each, one purer than the last. I took the bottle, studied the cream-colored powder, and told him he truly was the finest biologist and pharmacologist in Europe, that this purity was already high. He waved it off modestly, saying he'd done little, that I was the one who'd handed him the purification process. Then he pressed on, excited, telling me he'd handed out salicin for free around the Pont Neuf, and the results had been superb. The medicine worked not just on pneumonia but on fevers from all sorts of illnesses, and in just a few days it had saved 7 or 8 lives. He hesitated, then said he and Larceny wanted to raise money to make salicin on a large scale, since it could save countless lives, and asked what I thought. Half the proceeds, he added, would of course be mine. Then he murmured that most of the poor souls suffering from disease could hardly pay much anyway. I shook my head. If we raised money, I told him the investors would end up controlling how the medicine got made and sold. Lamarck asked in surprise what I meant. I told him I would put up the funds myself and build a pharmaceutical factory to produce salicin, remembering the homeless people I'd seen collapsed in the corners of Saint Antoine. We would cap the profit at 3%, and people could even trade willow bark for the medicine. The way Lamarck and Perna looked at me then was pure reverence, and they said I was too kind, and might the Lord bless me. Lamarck hesitated before warning me that the workshop would likely need 50 to 60,000 livres, and on a 3% margin, recovering that cost would take an eternity. I smiled and shook my head. The 3% was an emergency reserve. I never intended to earn a thing from the medicine itself. I wasn't playing saint, and I wasn't burning money for fun. I had a plan. As a medicine, salicin could save lives, and selling it cheap was simply a good deed. But the substance wasn't only a fever reducer. It was also a remarkably effective cosmetic. Even in my old life, salicylic acid, the oxide of salicin, still went into acne treatments and skin renewal products. There was a saying I remembered well, that the easiest money in the world came from women and children. Package and promote a salicin beauty product properly, and it would sell for well over 10 livres a bottle, with noble ladies clawing over each other to buy it. Lamarck told me I was truly great and thanked me on behalf of countless ordinary Parisians. I waved it off as nothing. Eager to spread his miracle drug across Paris, he said he knew a place perfect for a workshop if I cared to see it. I thought about it and told him purifying salicin didn't need especially complex equipment, and building a workshop from nothing was too slow. Better to just buy up an existing pharmaceutical or chemical region company. My attendant, Emin, spoke up then, asking leave to interject, and I told him to go ahead. He recalled that among the royal properties there was a perfume workshop that had been bleeding money for ages and was about to be sold, which might suit my needs. I told him he'd been a great help and asked if he remembered the price. He said it seemed to be around 26,000, and before he could finish I slapped my forehead. It was royal property. Why on earth would I pay for it, when I could simply go and ask my mother to hand it over? When the queen heard her son wanted to make affordable medicine for the common people, she nodded at once and set her lawyer on the paperwork. In under half an hour, the perfume workshop was signed over to my name. Being a prince did have its perks. I'd meant to go inspect it myself, but a servant announced that the Marquis de Castries was requesting an audience, so I left the factory in Lamarck's hands and went to the drawing room to meet the Navy minister. Castries bowed and went straight at it, saying the Queen had sent him to consult me about building new warships and that we absolutely must not cut the program. I stopped him with a smile and asked him first why he wanted to build warships in such enormous numbers. He said, his voice hard as steel, that he meant to deal with the British. He would smash the fleet they were so proud of, take back the colonies they'd stolen, and humiliate them as thoroughly as they had once humiliated his grandfather. I nodded and asked whether, even with the treasury's full backing, he was certain of beating them. He was ready this time and said that with a Spanish alliance and proper tactics, there was a chance. The chance was very small, I told him flatly. And at naval tactics, the British simply outmatched us. His face fell, but he refused to fold and asked how we'd ever know without trying. I gestured for him to drink his tea and stayed perfectly calm. I asked him to suppose the Navy had warships faster than 20 knots, carrying 25 42-pounder guns and 30 24-pounder guns, their hulls clad in iron armor. Combined with our existing ships, I asked whether he thought we could beat the British fleet. Castries chuckled that it was pure fantasy. If we had ships like that, he said, he could make those British devils wet their breeches. I looked him dead in the eye and told him in complete seriousness that within a year at the earliest, or 2 to 3 at the latest, we could begin building those very fictional warships. He was stunned and stammered whether I was serious, whether it was even possible. I sipped my tea and confirmed it again. It was true. I was completely confident. So he should stop wasting money on the ships we already knew how to build, because within 2 or 3 years they would all be obsolete. I told him I wouldn't keep him waiting long, that I'd be heading to the port of Brest soon, and he'd understand everything then. I could promise it because the steam engine already existed, the craftsmen and techniques were mature, and the only thing lacking was power, thanks to inefficient design. That was no obstacle for me. I had seen engines generations beyond anything this century imagined. Castries went lightheaded, his mind lurching between doubt and excitement and imagination, unable to find words. I told him to go coordinate with the shipbuilding bureau first, and have them start gathering craftsmen and raw materials, since trialing the new ship would be a complicated business. He said he'd go at once, admitting the dreamlike warship was simply too tempting to dismiss. Then he stared at me, his voice trembling slightly, and begged me to keep my word. I told him to rest easy. Then I remembered one more thing and told him that when he got back he could gather craftsmen to make a kind of large-caliber short-barreled gun. He blinked in confusion. I told him to just lengthen the existing mortars. It would throw a shell weighing over 60 pounds, but its barrel and powder charge would be less than half a cannon's, making it light and not hard to machine. Castries asked in surprise what use such a gun could be. Powerful but hopelessly short-ranged. I only smiled and told him I'd explain once we reached the Brest shipyard. In truth, this was the carronade, the weapon that would one day cause the French Navy such grief at the Battle of Trafalgar. The current French Navy suffered from one fixed idea, an absolute worship of range. In an ideal world, if my guns reach farther, I hit you while you can't touch me, so I win. But that was where their theory parted ways with reality. In the age of sail, ships handled poorly, and keeping both fleets at maximum range was nearly impossible. Worse, solid shot lost its bite at distance, and rarely crippled an enemy hull from far off. Real naval battles were fought nose to nose, both sides practically ramming their muzzles into each other's cabins to trade fire. At that range, reach meant nothing. Whoever had the bigger caliber ruled. The British had noticed exactly this, abandoned range, and built their short-barreled heavy guns, the carronades. In this life, though, it would be the French Navy's turn to field the devastating thing first. History was mine to edit, and I intended to use a heavy pen. I talked it through with the Navy minister, confirmed he had no objections, and personally walked him out. Before I could even catch my breath, Eamon came in quickly and bowed, announcing that the Marquis de Saint Priest was requesting an audience. I hadn't expected the war minister to be so impatient, but it was fine since it saved me writing that document. Unlike my meeting with the Navy minister, I received Saint Priest in my private study, sent every servant away, and had the guards outside fall back 10 meters. Once I'd laid out my plan in full, the war minister was instantly shaken and demanded how I knew she was in Nijmegen. I thought privately that I'd seen it in a documentary, but could only feign mystery and tell him that was a secret, though the information was absolutely reliable. Try explaining a documentary to a man from 1787. His brow nodded, and after a long silence he nodded with visible difficulty, granting that the plan was workable but the risk enormous. Even the best spies could fail, he said, and one slip could trigger a war. I told him to relax. Even if it leaked, as long as Wilhelmina came to no harm, Prussia would echo our version of events in public. Their economy was in shambles, and they wanted war with France even less than we did. He pondered a while longer, then rose and said the matter was too great, that he had to report to the Queen before anything final. I agreed and walked him to the door. Then I stopped and suggested he ought to thank me properly for this. He was slightly stunned.